Okay, we'd like to welcome everybody back to the workshop, and it's a continuation from yesterday. And again, we do have Miss Jessica Sawinski with us and Dr. Beverly Emery from DPI and board members present. If we could, before we get started, Mr. Henry, can you give us a word of thanks?
Sure. Our dear gracious Heavenly Father, we come at this time, dear Lord, we just thank you for another glorious year. We just thank you for a smooth transition back into the classrooms face to face. We're glad to have our superintendent back with us and all the other board members that may have been impacted by this time of the year. And we ask that you work with our group as we move forward to strengthen ourselves, to make better decisions for our teachers, staff, students, and everyone involved. In your heavenly name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning. We hope you're good. We hope you got some rest and really enjoyed being with you last night. I'm going to tell a quick story, and while I'm doing that, we're going to ask you to give us some feedback about sort of how you left last night, how you're feeling about that. Jump in. Jess and I enjoyed some fellowship with you, and then we went back and did our homework until about midnight. So we hope you're going to see some of what you shared with us reflected in our activities today. We are really going to dig into case study scenario. We're going to use some instructional strategy with you to get through those. And our goal before we wrap up is for you to connect these scenarios back to those commitments we talked about last night. How do these issues or challenges that you face as board leaders connect to your commitments? And then what actions can we take together to address them? What are we willing to commit to? And as we shared in the room just a few minutes ago, our goal is to then give you a framework, a format, or some way that you can extend that work if you want the additional hours. You can do that individually or as a board. You know, how can you practice some of these things that we agree to today if you want to work towards more hours? I was thinking this morning about how to get started, and the word that kind of popped in my head was faith, and what faith you have had in each other, and particularly us. We really can't say enough. I think we tried yesterday to share how incredibly proud we are to be back here and have watched the incredible growth and leadership development of this team over the last 18 months to 2 years. And when I think of faith, I always think of my grandfather. He was a Southern Baptist minister, and he was a little bit crazy, and we never knew, where Grandpa was going to show up, and he was very much, teetotaler, and anyway, part of what he did was seed churches. So he started a church, and then he would go around the county and the community starting churches. So we never knew where he might show up. And lo and behold, one day, my dad, who was his father, he opens the newspaper, and my grandfather is on the front page of the paper, big picture, at the opening of the ABC store. The ribbon cutting, the first ABC store in McDowell County, and there's Grandpa right up there with everybody. And we're like, something's wrong here. What is happening? And so, Dad calls his dad. It's like, no, Pop, what? Did you know you're on the front page of the paper? What's your congregation going to think? And he went to the ribbon cutting of the ABC store and went up to the officials and asked if he could pray before they cut the ribbon, because he had faith that this was not going to be a negative impact on the community or the county. And of course, they let him pray. And so then he took that newspaper around everywhere to show everyone that he had prayed over the ABC store. He always talked to us about faith we worked in a garden every summer, and we could hear the kids at the Rudertown pool swimming. And my sisters and I would pray for a storm, because that was the only way we would get out of the garden, right? If there was some kind of storm. And so he would always tell us, if you have faith, you would be out here working in your raincoat. If you really had faith that you were praying and your prayers would be answered. And I just want to start there because I see so much here that says to me, the faith that you have in this district, the faith that you have in each other, in your superintendent, in what capacity is here for this district to be lifted up and recognized as, you know, one of the most excellent places for kids in the state of North Carolina. And so thank you for letting us sort of be the riders on the side as you work through this. Dr. Williamson, we're so glad to have you this morning, and it does my heart good to see you in this room with these folks. So thank you for your leadership.
Great group of folks. Great group of folks to work with.
Absolutely. So give us some feedback from last night before we get started here. Any comments or things you'd like to share? I wanted to put that in the context of, these are your one word. You remember when we did the activity, your one word that you pulled. How you feeling this morning? We know you're not shy. We sat with you last night at dinner, so.
I thought about, on my way home last night, you know, about the different things that I had written down on our cue cards. And I think a lot of it went back to communication and how we communicate at different levels.
And we captured that here.
And communication was actually tied to being informed and the importance of that loop that you're talking about.
I think being proactive rather than reactive, and that was one feeling, and just anticipating today that I came with last night is, and you know, you've alluded to that too, and I'm proud of our board, you know, being here, you know, Friday night, Saturday morning, and it's, you know, it's not that we want to be defensive, but we want to be ready, and we want to be able to move forward in the midst of, or in spite of difficult circumstances.
I think the thing that probably I was most proud that came out last night was the civility, the concept that we're so civil, we're so different. Everybody here, we're different from each other. But we were able last night, I think, to recognize those differences, but yet to have a cordial conversation toward what is that one goal, and it's to educate children. And the differences were respected, I think, a lot more when we understand what we're supposed to be about. That's the thing, and the civility, that goes with civility, in my opinion.
Dr. Emanuel, that civility connects right back into that mutual respect and those relationships, which are all nicely tied together.
Anybody else want to share?
Informative. And the parts of that is the funds that come from the federal, state, and local, and that the superintendent, we have to put our trust in him. As far as the school district's concerned, and then let the chips fall where they may, by coming back to the board and being proactive.
Even though everybody has their own independence, last night when we was fellowshipping, everybody dropped their guard, so there was no more independence. We started sharing relationships and building relationships with everybody.
Very obvious. And it felt good too, didn't it?
Just the fact of being able is sit here, and when we went out later, just to sit and talk. And, you know, we use the word communicate and respect, and all of those are true. But just to be able to sit and talk and share ideas, pick up the phone, do whatever, and do it freely. to me is very important as an individual and as this board.
Excellent. So as we move into this morning, based on your feedback, and then what we talked about yesterday, I want to encourage you to practice this civility in the relationship building, because that helps us get to trust. And remember, when you talked about trust yesterday, most all of you indicated trust was built from someone who accepted you the way you are without judgment, who was willing to be honest with you and tell you what you might not want to hear. And that's important in this work, that we don't take that personal or that it comes as a threat to us, that we accept that people who will tell us things straight care about us, just like our parents did, or our spouses, or those friends over time that are able to tell us things we might not always want to hear. So we really want to encourage in this environment this morning, healthy conversation. If you disagree, we want you to do that, because out of this dialogue and really looking at some of these real challenges, we think you get to practices and processes that serve your board and serve your district.
Dr. Emery, one of the things I'd like to add is, I think you all know we are in transition at the agency as well. So, becoming a new team with someone does require all of those things that Dr. Emery's talked about and you lifted up through your words last night. But one of the things that has stood out to me in our reformation of our team, and as you approach the work together today, is to think and remember and to assume good intent. If we can make that part of our internal check, that the people who are sitting around this table this morning all are bringing good intent to the work that you're doing. No one has malintent here. And sometimes it's those communication pieces and those things that we may see differently, but we need to get them out and we need to talk about them. But in all things, assume good intent until someone demonstrates that that is not the case. But I just have to believe in my heart, you are not seated here as board members, and your communities did not trust you to elect you to this position if they did not believe you would approach this work with good intent. So I just wanted to share.
Perfect. So we're going to jump in here, and we have 10 scenarios. We're being ambitious.
We are.
This morning. We don't have to get through all of them, but we have 10. Our goal is to spend the first 90 minutes or so really taking a deep dive in them, but we have some structure around that. So for each scenario, the first thing we want to do is remember back to yesterday's authorizing documents. And we're going to have some different ways of asking you to talk about, does this scenario have an authorizing document? And we have the expert in the room with us this morning who can help us if we aren't aware or there's something that we may miss in terms of that authorizing document. Then we're going to ask you to pair up or to individually or in a small group, talk about how you would solve this problem. What would you do? Once you know you have an authorizing document, what would you do to solve it? And then lastly, we're going to come back, as we said, and try to match up to the commitment from 2120 and really look at what actions or behaviors could we do that would help us address those kinds of situations as a board. So Jess, you want to lead us off?
I will, and I want to just add one more thing. Last night, Dr. Emery had to check me. It was about 11:59, and she said, and I was going, oh, we're going to come out. We've got 10 scenarios. We're going to have 10 commitments, 10 action steps. And she's like, okay, let me give this back to you. That's her great thing. That is a great strategy. Whenever somebody's talking to you about something and you need to kind of bring them back into the reality realm, her great catchphrase is, let me give that back to you. And I love that. I'm going to totally use that, like on my husband, whenever I get home. But as she's telling me, let me give that back to you, what she also was saying is, if we can leave today with 3 to 5, I'd be happy with 3 to 5 things that you can commit to as action steps that you are all going to hold one another accountable for as you move forward, then that would be a win. Okay, so she had to check my ambition
not 10.
last night.
Not 10.
Not 10, because we can't do 10. And one thing we know, even in our working with teachers and principals, you got to do things bite-sized. You know, sometimes you go slow to go fast. So we have to be able to handle things that we are agreeing to. All right, so let me give that back to you. All right. All right, so we're going to move forward. And I don't know if you've ever seen the John Quinones thing on ABC News where he does, it's the What Would You Do series. It's fascinating when you put these hidden cameras in places and you put up these weird scenarios. So today is going to all be about what would you do? All right, so scenario one. Dr. E, you want to take it for us?
So we have here a person who's elected to the Sunshine Valley School Board, Luke. As soon as he's elected, he's overwhelmed by phone calls and emails about employment opportunities. Gosh, we didn't hear any of that from you in your write-ups yesterday. Just kidding, right? It seemed that members thought as soon as he was elected, his role really was just to get them a job. But his new board member training made it really clear that he had no authority as just one member. So how could Luke satisfy those who voted him into office without overstepping his role? So our first question to you is, do you have authorizing documents that would help you if that was the scenario you found yourself in?
Yes.
Trying to think of how I want to capture this because we're going to keep working through these today. So I'm going to try to take some notes, maybe on some chart paper. I'll get the chart paper.
I'll grab it. What authorizing documents do you think you would use?
Well, equal employment opportunity, I mean, everybody has to be, I mean, you just can't give somebody a job, so there's a process of hiring.
Excellent. And that's grounded in federal law, correct?
Right.
Brady, so
And it's really not our role we're not employed agency. Make policy.
thank you. So where would I find that? What document would authorize that for me as?
2120,
Yeah,
Right,
number 11.
yep, that's
Number
what I
11.
pulled out too. Is,
General statutes, you are the hiring authority. As a board, you're the hiring authority. And the public sees that you're the hiring authority. What the public don't understand is all the time, you're a unit. You're not individuals. The board is a unit. And only as a unit do you have the authority to hire, and only upon the recommendation of the superintendent. So, you got to put everything into context. So when somebody, calls, and of course, I don't voice this to you. I mean, you've got to do what you think that you should do. But as a board member, if I were in your shoes and somebody called me and said, Grady, I need a job, the most I'm ever going to do is say, okay, I'll make sure that, if you qualify, they consider you for an interview. But going beyond that point, I mean,
yeah,
is murky water.
yeah.
I don't know if I should say this, but I have to say it. And this is directed to Mr. Grady or anyone. What happens, and you just opened Pandora's box, Mr. Grady, which you're correct. You said based on the recommendation of the superintendent. And someone else just said over here, the best qualified person for the job, okay? What happens if that concept gets lost before it gets to the board? And someone's recommended that, and we all know as board members, that's not been followed. It's not the best qualified person. They don't have the qualifications.
Well,
But yet our superintendent, they say, this is who I want.
again, I understand the dichotomy. There's a recommendation. You always have a right not to support the recommendation. That's the board's authority as a unit. Just because a recommendation's made, you don't always have to, a recommendation is just that, a recommendation. you've got the final hiring authority.
Okay.
So also in that, let me say, I think this is why we're here. What is the board's role? You're a policymaker, and policies also have procedures. So do we have policy that guides how we hire? And procedures that make sure we're in compliance with EEOC? Because the last thing we want is to have a filing against us that we did just what you said, that someone qualified got overlooked or didn't get an interview. So what are those steps we have in place that get us there? So, and we shouldn't always think about doing it from being sued, but it doesn't hurt to use that lens, right? What happens if we haven't picked and someone can say, you overlooked me on purpose, or you hired your friend or your neighbor? So what policies and procedures tighten up that process for us? Because that's what we do as a board. And to me, then you fast forward to the superintendent's recommendation. In between there, it's not your lane. It is not your lane. Do we have tight policies that give us what we need for statute? And then in the end, do we vote it up or down? Right? Do we vote it up or down? And your smart superintendent, those who are experienced, know how to gauge at the end, not to bring you something you're going to vote down. Usually that doesn't happen. So part of that's also how do we then communicate? So if I'm bringing you an assistant superintendent and they're not going to have enough votes around this table, that we don't embarrass each other publicly when we get there. But there are also times, for the community's sake, you may need to vote down a recommendation just because that's your right to do so. So I want to push you a little bit beyond that. We've talked about authorizing documents. How do you handle that as a board member, though? What is your response? What do you do here to all these people who are calling you? Because let's be clear. People want something from you. That's not bad. That's human nature. I elected you. I want something from you.
I politely ask them to call personnel, and I'm honest, if I do not know, I haven't seen the advertisement, and many times I haven't, and I will say, call personnel, and I'm more about it, and I direct the person that they need to talk with. Never at any point do I say, you will get the job, because I've been there and done that. I worked in that department some years ago. But I always try to help them and lead them to the persons that they should talk with, or ask them, have you talked with the principal? That would be my first line, because that's the person directly interviewing that is going to recommend. I try to direct them through the process, but never say, and I always say to them, the property of the people applying, and just be just as civil to them as I can and offer as much information without putting myself in that I'm going to hire you or recommend you. And I find 9 times out of 10 that works.
Anybody else? Craig?
And well, there was comments before, but one of the perceptions that we have, and I don't think it's just you, I think it's everywhere, is that we do hire the people. And not that authority we have as a board that we actually get the people the job. As individuals, that's a perception that is around, that you call Craig or you call Randy and you're going to get the job. You got to call in. When I first got on the board, that scenario up there, I got calls all the time. And the basic start off was, I've applied for this job, Mr. Craig, and I was told I need to call you to get the job. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of scenario with me that it would start with. And my comment afterward, well, whoever told you that told you wrong. And we would have a conversation along with what Dr. Manuel said. Number one, they need to be qualified if they're applying for the job. You make sure you've done all of that. As far as what I could do, if you've done all that, you let me know you've done that, I can ask to get you an interview. And that's as far as that I go. And I think the more I did that, the less calls I get now. I will get you an interview, but I'm not going to do anything else. Then I'm looking at what the superintendent gives us as a recommendation. And again, we go back to the procedure there. If people's applied, we have groups set up that do interviews for whatever the job might be. That group does an evaluation and gives a recommendation to the superintendent. Superintendent looks at it and goes through that and brings the recommendation to us. And, you know, that's the way it's supposed to happen. And, you know, that's as far as what we do. You know, get the interview and that's it. But as I tell people, you got to sell yourself when you go in there for that interview.
Sabrina, you have a comment?
I've been approached multiple times with the same situation. And I learned a lot from Mr. Craig as a new board member. And matter of fact, in the first month or so, I asked him, you know, how did he approach that? And I've learned his method works, but I found the mediator between us and the community is we have to give everybody assurance that you're doing everything in your limitations, if you allow me to say, to help them. And what I've found is sometimes that person may have felt like they went on and put in an application, but Mrs. Ledbetter here did not receive it. And it might be because they forgot to push the send button. And you know, once I find out that kind of information and I feed that back, you'd be surprised how much synergy it brings between the board member and the community as far as working together. And I always explain, just like Mr. Craig said, I'm only one vote, I'm one board member, can't promise you anything. All I ask you to do is to sell yourself. You have to sell yourself. And another thing I found is, folks will say, well, I didn't know about that. I didn't know that job was advertised. There's a lot of people don't go on PSRC website. So I tell them, you know, if there's a job that's open, I try to communicate it to everybody. And I'll be the first to say I'm guilty of putting it on Facebook, PSRC job openings, and that way I leave it at that. And the thing is, folks can't say that I discriminated as far as who I shared that information with.
So let me push you a little bit on that, just in respect and civility. So whose role is it to advertise job openings in the?
Miss Mary Ledbetter is one.
Human resources.
Human resources, just central office.
So part of where you're going, and Jess, I think we play this one all the way.
I do too.
Okay,
You guys are rocking and
you're in a
rolling.
good place.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is, and I agree with this, it took me a while as a superintendent to learn it, but you've got to have something to give. So let me just encapsulate what might be, from what I'm hearing, an action we could take here. Is that HR, in combination with communications, creates you some talking points that has the link directly to your site where people could come. You can walk through, you know, this is my role, I've created policy, I can connect you to the website so you can see what's there. Here's the people you need to contact in the district. You're giving them something, but it's completely within your parameters as a board. You're not advertising jobs, because let me say, if you're trying to help people, the minute you don't post something, they're gonna come back and say, well, you posted those, why didn't you? And you can't keep up with that. It's not your
You're right.
job. Somebody else has a full-time job to do that. So how do you guide them and direct them to the right place as policymakers without getting in the middle of that? And that is something, when we talk about working this all the way through. If you agree as a board, this is the way we're going to handle this. Part of what Jess and I were talking about is saying, okay, for the next 90 or 120 days, we're going to practice this. All of us. We're going to keep a log of every call we get that asks us about a job, and we're going to mark, did we give them this? What did we do with that? Did we refer them to the website? Did we refer them to HR? And maybe you can't. And we're human, but that's what we mean by how do you take this and practice it and then come back and talk about it as a board? Was that hard? Did somebody scream at you? Did somebody think you had made a promise to them? But that's how you get better at doing this, is making a commitment to each other and to your superintendent about how you're going to handle these things. The other part of that is, if you're worried about HR. So let's just, this is completely hypothetical, but let's just say there's problems there, that people call and they don't get answers, or no one returns their
Right.
call, or, so that is another layer of this that could complicate your role, right? If you're referring and then nobody gets feedback or gets a call, but that's where you go to the person in charge, right? Those are those internal conversations that happen in closed session where you talk about, we need to improve our processes.
Yes.
So when we're referring people, they do get some kind of response, they do feel heard, because if they don't, where are they coming?
To the board member.
They're coming right back.
Right back to you.
Go ahead, Ms. Brenda.
I'll say board members.
Yes.
One of the things that I do is I always refer them to the site and tell them to follow the process. And I make certain that I tell them if they do call HR and they don't get an answer, to contact me back. And I'll take their name and I will call Melissa and give her the information just in case. Because we've particularly doing these uncharted times and situations that we've had to deal with.
I think that's an excellent strategy as well. So if you have something that you've agreed on and you've referred people and they come back to you and say, I never got a phone call, I would not be reluctant at all as a board member to say, I can get you a return call.
That's right.
I had a young lady that was doing the application and she had difficulty getting it completed to the point that she could send it. So, I connected her with Miss Ledbetter, and Miss Ledbetter ended up seeing what she was experiencing and actually had to invite her here to the central office to resolve the matter, just to get her application in. So that, I think that connection shows that we may have a breakdown in our process that we need to focus on.
What I like about what
Ain't
you're saying is that you didn't help her complete her application,
Yeah.
right? Because then you get into this whole issue of what's your authority, and you do hire. So if you help someone complete an application and then they don't get the job, or they do get the job, that gets you in a place you don't want to be long-term.
And the other thing that I'm hearing, I'm really liking about this conversation is, if everyone agrees to a process, then it's really easy to find the weak spot, right? So if everybody is doing the same thing and you know that people are not getting return phone calls, you can say with fidelity that we have upheld a process that we as board members have followed. We now are confident to say to the superintendent, there's a gap in service. We have a customer service matter, and we need to get to the root of that. But if half of the board is implementing a process and implementing an agreement and half are not, you will never know for sure where the weak spot is. So the procedures that you're talking about developing actually create a checks and balances system for you as you do your work. And it's critical for that. Yes, sir.
And we're not saying that that is an issue.
Right.
That was hypothetical.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then going back to part of what Mr. Henry and Dr. Emanuel said, I know one of the things that I've done when people say, they're going to turn an application, and a lot of it's done now electronic. And my comments always, well, look, after you've done it and you've hit send, wait a little while. If it's the next day, call down and see if they got your application. Make sure they've got it, because sometimes you think you've done everything and it never gets you. And that's just because something was done wrong. Now, and like Mr. Henry, and I've seen the post where he puts up the jobs. That's not something that I would do. And I don't do it because a lot of time people call me and say, look, there's this job so-and-so. I know nothing about the job. I haven't looked because it's not something I look for. As far as jobs like that, I depend on if somebody wants an interview, you get in touch with me. And so I don't go in there and look and put jobs up anywhere, because they'll call and say, there's this job here. I don't know anything about it. well, it's posted and everything. Okay, if it is, you get in the application and do what you're supposed to, and then, we'll go from there. But it's gonna be up to you to get that job for yourself. Because a lot of times we might get 3 jobs posted Monday. They might be 2 posted Thursday. Now, I'll look at them and just see it, but that's as far as I go with it, as far as just looking and see it. I don't keep up a mental image that these jobs are out here.
So I want to ask you to do something here, and because I think you're accelerated and we could actually wrap a commitment if you want to. And we can come back to it if it's not in your top 3, we don't have to, but I want to flip this and ask you, what would you propose as an action that this board could all accept you would do consistently that would help address this issue?
I have,
Did you have a comment before we jump into
Yes,
that?
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I did, and I was just gonna piggyback on what Mr. Craig has said, but when I came on the board, and I'm just using this for an example. Our county is big. You got 11 board members. And promising somebody that they get an interview is a lot different than them getting the job. But if each board member I'm gonna just use this for an example. We've had secretarial jobs where there was 50 or more people apply for one job. There's only one job opening and you've got 50, so 49 is not getting hired. So it gets complicated there, but the person has to go in and sell themselves. And my thing is that someone who has worked in the school, had children in the school, I've always said this, employees in our school system deserve to be promoted when there's a promotion. If they have done the job and been a hard worker, and things of that sort. But coming down to it, when you say, you can get them an interview, if each one of us gets 2 people an interview, that's 22 people. That's half of what you're interviewing. And there again, I mean, you're narrowing it down, but still it's human resources and the superintendent's responsibility to show the qualifications. And if the qualifications are there, it doesn't lie. It is what it is. So, for taking a look at that, it would stop, I'm saying, some of the things that have went on in the past. And I'm good with it. But when I came on the board, I was told that if somebody was wanting to get interviewed, that a board member had that authority to ask for them to get an interview. Not to say that they're hired, but to ask for them to help them get an interview.
I think you're really spot on with where you're going there. And I would just also flip it back on you. So one, you've articulated the challenge you create for your district and your HR department if you believe you have influence to create interviews.
Right.
But what are you saying to that 1 in 50 if you say, I can get you an interview? Because what do they hear?
I can get you the job.
Do they hear interview or do they
They
hear?
hear a job.
Right.
Right, they may not, and then you've set yourself up again for this dissonance that you're trying to get around. So I think you make a really good point. My question to you is, how could you use your authority to talk about some of the things you have said are priorities? I'm giving you an example. Lots of boards, because they're trying to diversify their workforce, literally have language and policy that says, if candidates are equally qualified, we are looking for diversity in our teaching staff, in all of our staffing. So people know, we want our kids in our system to see people who look like them. That's policy language. There are lots of, I spent 15 years in union territory. Trust me, collective bargaining agreements say if somebody internal is qualified for the job, they get it. I mean, and that's not what you have to do. But you do have policy authority to lift up your preferences that support the mission and vision of your district in your actual hiring policies.
One of the things, Mr. Lawson, you just mentioned, which for me, honestly, hearing you say that, just the volume and what those unintended consequences of us being truthfully trying to be helpful and saying, you know, we can get you the interview, the volume that I'm just thinking about that could potentially happen in that regard, then every candidate is only the candidates that have been given, you know, you see what I'm saying? If there are only 10 interview spots and every board member has promised someone that they can get them that interview, well, then the only candidate pool that the district would ultimately likely see are those that have been brought in by the board. So it's a logistical issue for the department who is tasked with finding what you have clearly stated, you want the best candidates. There's nobody in this room that I know doesn't want the right candidate in these jobs. So I just think it's a very valid point that you.
Also, we have to be cognizant of the Spanish community. If we get an opportunity to get somebody that's bilingual.
Right.
But your policies and procedures can also address those kinds of issues.
And trusting the recruitment process to help follow through with your policy and your priorities that you establish in policy.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I guess I was answering the question you said before we got into some more discussion. How do we solve this problem, the scenario? I think in my
Proposal.
I think in my opinion, the superintendent sets the climate, okay? You could say like, and Randy alluded to this, it's like a light switch. With this superintendent, he pulled the light switch and turned the light off. That we don't even have, I don't think there's even a climate now that you got to hire this because I recommend it. It changed immediately. It changed. So my thing is, how do you solve it? It has to start with the superintendent that I'm not going to entertain any board member telling me, and we got to all back this up, telling me who to hire.
That's right.
I have to look at the qualifications. I have to look at the need there. And if it is a diversity need, that superintendent knows that. You see what I'm saying? I think we have to trust our superintendent to set that climate, to set that tone. Because what's happened in the past, it was taken, it went too far to the left.
That's right.
That's right.
And Randy had a good point. He brought that up a while ago. It's stopped, bam, just like that.
Yes, it is.
Well, but you have a role then to support that, right? That's what we're talking about.
Support it, but
You have to all be committed to that, because if one person is saying, I can get you an interview, and another person is saying, this is our policy, here's our website, our superintendent has a process.
But they're sitting in here, I don't think there's a person sitting around this table would go to Dr. Williamson or call Dr. Williams and say, Dr. Williamson, my niece needs a job and she's been interviewed. I want you to put her at XYZ school.
That's right.
There's not a person around this table now would go to that man and say to that man, because he's already set the tone that he's not going to go for that.
That's right.
In my opinion. Now, Dr. Williamson, am I wrong?
No, the other part of the conversation has been said already. One, we must trust the process. Contract. And then the third part of that is, I need to understand the superintendent by law, my obligation to make the recommendation for the best person for the job. And then we all have to understand, we make recommendations based on potential, that this person can develop into what we need in that position. So we need to be clear, but we have to trust the process from start to finish.
What's tainted the process in the past is that we've had positions, even in the central office, that assistant may have been working with a doctor of education, and maybe they're going to night school and they're going to graduate in December. Well, this person can retire. It's over that particular job. And they'll say, well, I'm going to hold off till December. That way you stand a potential of getting this job. And it's hard on board members when the community hears and sees that, and we open it up for opportunities of employment, but yet we put that person in that job, whether they are the best qualified or not, how do you explain to the community, why did you even advertise it if you already had somebody in mind? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I'm glad you went there. Let me ask the rest of you. Is that a board member responsibility to fix that? Where does that go?
Human resources.
Well, where does it go first?
Superintendent.
Superintendent. Your superintendent is your and if he says to you, these are the things I need you to bring to me, and these are the things it's okay to go directly to HR on, then that's what you do. But first and foremost, he can't fix processes or find vulnerabilities in processes if you aren't, right?
Okay.
You've got to be sure that person knows. And, you know, to me, it's as simple as that. If that's the one commitment you want to make, we're going to start making sure any of these things we refer to the site and we make sure our superintendent knows if there are concerns. And you may already be doing that. I just think there's something important about formalizing that and saying, we're going to all do this and see how it works, because it helps your superintendent. It helps you. And it is sort of a solidarity, right? That all of us are acting in the same way. Tell me how you feel about that. Does that feel like we're messing with your individuality if we work on a systemic response?
Well, we can't act, one person can't act. We act as a unit, so I don't know how anyone could feel it's messing with our individuality. Because we're just one vote, we're nothing. We got to be a unit. Maybe I'm seeing it all wrong. Maybe I'm going the wrong way with it.
No, I
We could
think,
agree on a procedure. That's
can
what,
you agree on a procedure here?
Yeah.
What I see,
Dr. Emery, it shows that we're looking to leadership, the CEO that we put in charge when we do it that way, which is the superintendent.
that's what I'm seeing, commonality.
I'm not sure if it's written or not, but in talking with the number of people we might get a call on, and it's not a lot about now. There's a job, and what can you tell me? That's one aspect. We get the call and we say, well, we'll help you get an interview. But is there a written or unwritten something that we would do if we have an employee that there's a job available and that an employee is interested in that job? Now, I've always understood that if they express an interest in that job as an employee, they will get an interview. Am I correct on that, Dr. Williamson? I know you haven't been here.
Internal employee.
Yes,
Yes,
they have to make that request themselves. So that puts some people in that group you're talking about, Mr. Andy, it's got 50 people and we've got whatever job. So our employee wants a job interview, so they get the interview. Then we get a call or two, you put some people there. Now, at one time, principals could come down if it was at their school and they could look at that list of who has applied for that job. They could go through and pick out, if there's people there, read the resume, see what's there, and decide who to interview to. So you would go through that. So you're picking up numbers that you're going to interview. And like you said, now, if you got 50 people applying for a job and you interview, you're not going to interview all 50, but whatever you interview, most of them's not getting a job. Only one's going to get it. But those are a couple of things too, that our employees are included when they are interested in the job.
And that's a known internal procedure. So the procedure will be qualified internal candidates are given consideration via interview. Is that an accurate
Yes.
internal process? Okay.
I got a question as far as, the process and what's staying in, equal opportunity guidance, I should say. If we have, say we have 2 or 3 internal employees that want to move from one job to another job, I'm not sure from an equal employment opportunity if we have to advertise that job, or can the superintendent make a decision between him and the principals or whomever it involves, or maintenance director or whatever, to internally make that, and I would think they could, And that would speed up the process to backfill the position that we moved that person from.
Mr.
Could, 1
There's a
month,
policy in place for that.
in other words, 2 or 3 months of this board dealing with transferring of people and names, it could took place in 1 month. I'm not clear on what that process is.
Superintendent always has transfer authority. I think the statute allows it, and your policy probably does too, Grady.
That's correct.
But on what Mr. Henry's saying, at the end, this board has got to approve it. It's not something that the superintendent, I'm saying as far as,
Let's ask Greg, if a person, is it dependent upon promotion versus?
More pay, ain't it, Mr. Gray?
I think if it's a lateral transfer, there's no question that the superintendent has that authority on his
Correct.
own without the board's approval. I mean,
That's
that's,
right.
you know, and that's part of the superintendent's contract. He's got that, lateral authority too. I think when it gets, when there's a salary increase and more, you know, something more than what the person's already getting in that position, that's a different ballgame. It, you know, I've always looked at that as something that the board needs to, approve, because you're changing that person's benefits package, if you will, i.e. salary.
but it's still gonna be on our sheet at the end of the month. If it's a lateral move.
Right.
If it's a lateral move, without a salary increase, not necessarily. I don't think, I mean.
I'm just saying they've always been on there.
That's the practice that's always been, but,
Right.
you know, if they didn't, you know, that would be fine too, because there's that authority to do it.
Matter of information.
So it's
Yeah, matter of,
courtesy, it's a courtesy of communication, not necessarily a required act.
and that's the practice that's always,
My question is the gray area here. Say for instance that the superintendent moves a person from one job and maybe it's an increase. Does it have to go back through the interview process due to equal opportunities? Whereas- And I know that, like they said, it's on our sheet where that a person's moving from one position, recommendation is to another position. Whether it's, I hear you saying that if nothing changes our benefit package, but what if it does? Is it an equal opportunity issue now? Is that the gray area?
I think there's salary reclassification.
yeah,
Lateral move, but salary reclass.
that's where I think the board has to approve,
Okay, because that's a change.
because it's a change.
Simply not lateral. It's not Jessica going from Director of Exceptional Children to Director of Communications.
But it doesn't have to be advertised.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Lateral.
So can I also insert here, not to complicate it, this is the board's role. So if there are changes in that process that align to statute based on superintendent authority and board authority, there's where you fix it. Not that I decide as an individual, but I come back and say, you know, we might want to tweak our policy here. Grady, can, you know, that's where you want, so that everybody's operating inside those parameters of what that looks like. So, you know, that might also be an action step here, which is making sure the policy protects both the superintendent and the board. If your internal practice is if there's somebody internal that they're going to get an interview, or that that's clearly stated. Why? Because if 200 people apply and only 10 get an interview, and those are 10 internal people, you want to be able to go back to that authorizing document and say, this is our practice, this is our, you know, what we've approved, and I'm sorry you didn't get an interview, but we had 30 people apply internally, and that's where all the interviewing went. So again, it's sort of grounding yourself back in what you're authorizing. And you do, as a board, set that policy. So if there are things there that you want to see as a team change, you could do that.
I think there's a pervasive misconception in the public that the primary duty of the board is an employment agency. It's not. And one of the things that I am really glad about, that's come about just recently, is that our board meetings and our committee meetings, and this one as well, are made public so that people can hear what's going on and know that we're not simply an employment agency. There's a whole lot more going on. I won't say that you got one feeding the other. You won't have good education unless you've got a good employee. But we're involved in all aspects of education. We're not in the hiring business first and foremost. And I think we're working at that, and it's not just unique to this board, just like a lot of the other issues. But we really need to continue to work to change that perception among the public.
You hire one person. We're glad he's here today. You have hiring authority, but you really hire one person.
Right.
And sometimes we lose sight of that, right?
Yeah.
You guys have really come to
Yeah.
really, really rich conversation, and just want to get a temperature check. How's everybody feeling about the things that we've talked about? I mean, you're talking about everybody's approach this process. I mean, this is real, right? The scenario is real. It's going to happen when you walk out of this door. It might happen today, it might happen tomorrow. But everybody has approached this in their own way right now. So what are you, as we're talking about developing a communication that all of you have accessible, that anyone who is communicating with you, you say, here's my tool. Like, this is in my pocket toolkit. This is what you're going to get, anybody who calls me.
Does that feel okay?
Right.
Would that be helpful, and would that be something you could all commit to?
I'll start off. I think in order for us to allow the superintendent to do his job, that we should allow, or we should give him authorization, I should say, not allow, to take care of the internals if he feels between him and his staff that this person well qualifies for this job. We go ahead and move that job, whatever process they take, and then our job is to hold the responsibility to the superintendent.
Okay.
So let him have the power to do that process. And then whatever's communicated could be a backfill.
Yeah.
And that eliminates time also.
So let me just argue he already has that.
Yeah.
He already has that. And so
Right.
what we're talking about here is, what is your role as a board in supporting it? And I'm hearing you say that's what you want to do. We're trying to get you to, what does action on your part look like in these scenarios to support the fact that he already has that authority?
And or what perhaps does Dr. Williamson need to do on the backside of that? And one thing I heard in that particular piece of this conversation is superintendent has the lateral authority, transfer authority. We can all agree to that, right? We're going to stamp that learning. We're going to stamp it. We know that's true. But what may or may not be a process right now that the superintendent's office does is a courtesy communication to the board that has occurred. And I don't know if that's true, or I don't know if it is or not, but that is a possible action step that could take place when the superintendent is exercising his lateral transfer authority to loop everybody back in. Remember, communication being one of the most important things that you've lifted up. So I would just add that. So what does that feel like? Dr. Williamson, is that, in your experience, do you have a process like that, or would you think that there could be a process like that?
Should be, there is a process already in place. Do an outstanding job of advertisement, so everyone can really know what positions are available. But I think we can't have this conversation, you really helped me. Our disclaimer is, we're not going to participate in discriminatory hiring practices. That's what this whole conversation.
Yeah. We're going to stamp that one. I'm going to put it up here. How about
Yes,
that?
absolutely. And so in order to do that, we have to follow the process. If we're going to live that, we have to follow the process. So I'm going to push you back again one more time. And if I don't hear from you, we'll move on to a new scenario and you can think about it. What we're asking you is there some step or action as a board you're all willing to commit to that would help this issue? and support, we're not going to have any discriminatory.
One thing I was hearing too is, say for instance, I'm in the community and I'm at a country store and I'm approached that position, it wasn't advertised. I think the superintendent would do this. He would just communicate across to the board members that, we laterally moved or moved.
Superintendent has used his authority
Right.
to make a lateral transfer.
I have not yet ran into a person that I've said that, or existing employees has jurisdiction over any job and that can be decided internally. And I've not had a person yet that disagreed with that.
I would use the word trust. I would use the word trust,
Right.
the process, trust the superintendent.
Right.
So let me go
For
back.
me-
I'm gonna narrow you again, because we're in the time, and you all gave us a bunch of rich scenarios. We want to try to get through some more of these in our time.
We've been on Luke a long time.
But you've done a really good, and this is
Luke is a big rock, right?
a really big one. So one thing I heard earlier was, and I'm just gonna put these in commitment statements. We commit to notifying the superintendent when someone brings an employment issue to us that is problematic. We're not talking about applying for a job.
I agree.
I didn't get a return phone call. I don't know why someone got that call. Those are not our jobs as board members to resolve. Are we committed to saying, we're gonna take those to our superintendent? And until he tells us, I want you to give them to Ms. Ledbetter, or until he directs us in a certain way about those issues, we want him to know what those issues are. Is that one action everybody
Yeah.
says they can live with?
Yes, yes,
Can we
yes.
restate that for the group? Restate that. Gordon's gonna help us capture some of these
Okay,
things.
so what we're saying here is, if someone comes to me and complains about a principal, if someone comes to me and says, I didn't get an interview, if someone comes to me and says, I don't understand why Lula May got the job and it wasn't posted, all of those things, we're going to, as individual board members, take them to our superintendent and make him aware. We're
Yeah.
not going to try to fix it, we're not going to investigate, we're not going to say, this is the way we do things around here. We're going to say to that person, I'm going to make sure my superintendent knows about this. And I love what you said, Brenda, and we trust his process, so let him work on that.
Question. If that be the case, if 11 of us are going to the superintendent, what's the role of the board chair? I thought the board chair was used to funnel some information to the superintendent. So 11 people are not running to the superintendent. I'm not saying that he could stop us. We could go to the superintendent anytime we want. The board chair's never tried to stop us, but
Great question.
I think
Great.
is that the role of the board chair to sort of try to funnel some information to the superintendent?
I think that's an excellent point, and I guess what I would say is if you make the commitment that the information is going to go to the superintendent, let's let the chair and the superintendent decide.
Well, that's 11
what that
people.
look- Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. But, you know, Dr. Williamson is new. He may want to hear it directly for a little while. Or he may, so
And your chairman may be going, that's not my style, like, right? So it's a process that you have to decide. That is a,
Right.
what you were doing right now, guys, is making the sausage. This is not easy stuff, right? You've got to talk through these little pieces, because it's that little detail that you just lifted up right there that could make or break a commitment that everybody can actually do what we're committing to, right? So the question would be is, Dr. Williamson, do you want 11 people right now coming to you? Or would you prefer it come filter through the board? That should be part of the conversation, right? And then Chairman, are you good with being the repository or Vice Chair and Vice Chair of these concerns to then relay to the superintendent?
See, let me speak for me. That's how I operate. I go through the board chair, okay? Now, if there's something personal, I would have no problem contacting the superintendent. But issues, I go through the board chair, and the board chair may want to sit up there. You better support what I'm saying.
I'm just listening right now. You keep talking.
I was going to go through him with school business, And like I said, if it's a personal thing, I would go to the superintendent about me personally or something personal. But to me, seems like it can be handled more efficiently than 11 people going to the superintendent about mundane daily problems, daily operations. That's my point.
But we may be asking the board chair, we're putting him on the spot.
Well, he can speak for himself. If it works for me, that's.
Can I ask you to take time out on this just 1 second? Because we have a scenario that's gonna address some of this, and we'll come back. We will promise you, in fact, if it's not next, we'll go to that next, because some of you lifted up all board members getting all information.
Yeah.
And this is a prime example of how we communicate with who impacts whether everybody gets equitable information. So can we, it's a powerful point. Can we time out, wrap this one, and we'll go to that scenario next?
That's fine, but let me address Dr. Emmanuel.
Please.
Yes.
She does. Now, she will call me and say, can you check on this? And it's a check on from the standpoint, I talked to Dr. Williams. We've done that. And I don't have a problem doing that. It's just, I really think if we end up coming back to this and it does come through here, there are certain things I think as other board members, I would ask you to really filter out. Does it need to come to me and to the superintendent? Not necessarily it's something you can handle yourself, but we need to, we don't need to be bombarding the superintendent with 20 items each week. We have to look and decide to ourselves, how important is this? But now Dr. Manuel will come and she'll give me some information, and there's been several times I've just shared it with the superintendent. I don't necessarily say who it's from. I just said, this is a concern, and give him the information and go from there. But I'll stop and we'll come back when you get to it.
Great. We are putting things up here and we're going to ask you to react to them. You don't have to do it this minute, but in terms of actions, we're going to take concerns related to the hiring process to the superintendent. We'll use a standard tool or resource guide to give to our communities members when they contact us, and to trust the process. Our question is, do you want to try to come to consensus about offering interviews from the board member? And let me just push that just a minute. I'm going to push that a minute because your superintendent is talking about a core value. And that is that we're not going to have any discriminatory hiring processes. Correct, sir? So my push to you is, you as a board member say, the best I can do is get you an interview. How does that complicate or support?
I think that goes along the same lines that Mr. Craig was just talking about. If we each make that commitment, every person that calls us an interview, then I think we're overloading the system, and we're in a lot of cases may be making a promise that we can't back up. That's the way I feel about it personally. If I can't guarantee person X, Y, or Z that they're going to get an interview, and I really can't. I don't think, even as a board member, because of the system and because of the timelines that are involved in hiring. It may be a position that can't wait until 50 people are interviewed. So I think we need to be careful about making that kind of commitment. That's my personal thinking.
Other
How
thoughts?
could we state it in a way that we give prospective employees assurance that we're doing in our boundaries what we can to make sure they get some kind of feedback?
So what I would respond to that, and I'm not your superintendent, I'm just giving you an opinion. I don't think granting an interview is your authority. I don't think you have any authority as a board member to grant an interview. I do think you could say to the whole point, how do I give them something? I don't know. We average 20 jobs posted daily, whatever that number, that's what we're talking about, this little tool. We could give you some data that you could say to a person, right now or on an average day, there are 20 vacancies posted on our site. Please go to the site and look at that. I can't possibly know all the qualifications for all of those jobs. So I can't be the person saying who's gonna get what. But, I can try to guide you there. If you don't get a response, call me back. Those are the kinds of things you can do without promising something. Invariably, if you do background checks, if you have minimum qualifications, you could promise somebody an interview and they're not going to meet those things. And then you're the one, right? They're coming back. I don't trust him. He told me something that's not true. So I think the more you can stay back here and try to help them in other ways, but not commit to that. But I guess it's not our decision to make, it's yours, so.
But Mr. Brewer, one thing I am hearing clearly that I think could be a help to everybody is the communication tool, right? So you need to know what to say to someone that builds the assurance. So you need, and I've underlined, and thanks Gordon for taking messaging here, but you need speaking points that you can keep into your pocket until you get them internalized, right? So that everybody is speaking literally from the same sheet of music in this situation. So that the community starts to hear the same messaging and they grow in that trust that everybody, and then they don't say, well, he's going to tell me one thing, but I'm still going to call Craig, right? Because that's what will happen. You know how this works, right? So that's when we're saying that real commitment of this board. What can we commit to in practice and test it out for 60, 90 days and then give ourselves a chance to check ourselves. Is it working? Is it not working? What do we need to tweak? So that's where we're pushing you today. And I said it's making sausage because that's what it is. And just the level of engagement and conversations and questions that you're having, I just appreciate it so much because it does take time to do this work. So where we kind of landed in that question about commitments, we kind of listed the stamped things. These are the universal truths and values that we want qualified internal candidates are given consideration via interview. That is a universal truth. We can stamp that one. The superintendent has lateral transfer authority. And we're going to put here I'm putting green as like a step that we need to come back to and fix, right? Talk about the courtesy communication and how that process works. We're stamping that we're not going to participate in a discriminatory hiring practice. That's perfect. That really should be the number one. And while I said stamp and trust the process, I think that's actually a commitment. That's an action step. Trust is actually doing something, right? To trust the process. So for your consideration, we have this commitment, and it's not mine or Bev's. This is y'all's. So we're just jotting stuff down for you to consider. To take concerns related to the hiring process to the superintendent. Okay, so there's a concern related to the hiring process. Now, who takes it is the question mark here. We'll get to that. And to use a standardized tool or resource to guide community members to the HR tools, job postings, and then to develop a standard sheet of music, a playbook for you, so that you have the right speaking points to stay within the boundaries of your commitments to one another. And then ultimately, the third action step is to trust this process. So I just put those there for you to ruminate on. I don't know.
So let's do this, because I see a little human break needed here. So here's my suggestion. You got the three. Those are big things. Think about them. Let's take 5 minutes, Chair. Is that okay? A 5-minute break. What we're going to do is put the next scenario up while you take a break. So we ask as part of your break, to come back and take a look at this next scenario. We'll give you some time to process, and then we'll ask you later if you can support those three that are there.
I mean, you also have sticky notes. So if you have feedback that you want to put up on those that we've just listed, put your sticky notes up there. If you have questions or you have some concern, you don't have to put your name on it, just stick a sticky up there.
Now you know why I told Jess 10 was ambitious.
Let me give this back to you. There you go.
Let's take 5 minutes. We'll tee up the next scenario.
upon it through the lens that they bring to the table. So it's perfectly great that we are all having these conversations and agreeing on different things. So we got scenario 2, which is really communication driven. And I want to ask Dr. Williamson, do you want to talk a little bit about this particular one? Because the scenario as it is written is that we have a new superintendent, which we do. And she's concerned that she's returning all these individual phone calls with board members, but there's still some inequitable concern about conversations, because sometimes, like maybe Mr. Lawson, I'm just going to say, maybe Mr. Lawson calls and has a specific topic or an issue, but it really hadn't hit everybody else. And then maybe Ms. Linda has a different issue. So this is what's happening in this particular scene. So there's this perception of inequitable communication. And some people feel like they're out of the loop when they hear other board members talking about a topic that they had no knowledge about. So how can both the superintendent and the board work together to ensure all board members have equitable communication? So this is a scenario, but I want to let your new superintendent talk to this one a little bit.
Thank you, Jessica. Part of my 90-day plan was, one, to meet with every board member one-on-one, to establish that relationship that you can call me at any point, anytime, share any information. And then we've been very intentional in terms of information that impacts the district as a whole. It either comes directly from me or by way of Patty. So let me just hear from you. If we're short of doing what we intend to do, tell me, and so we can improve on that. But I'm very mindful that we need to share information with the board as a whole. Call me as individuals, share whatever needs that you might have, but I'm hoping communication at this point has been where you need it to be, that you know what you need to know in terms of what's going on in the district, major items day to day. Share with me, if we're falling short at this point, how can we improve that communication? Because again, my intent is for everyone to be involved.
I personally love and appreciate the open door policy that we can communicate. And collectively, I would think that you would, like you said, communicate to the total board what's necessary.
Well,
Please tell me.
Dr. Williamson, you and I have talked quite a bit, and come down and sit down with you and talked a few times, and it's been very good as far as, and some of mine has been concerns I had, but it's also sometimes been concerns that other board members had shared with me. But the one thing about, sometimes you hear something and other people don't know about it. I seen a few ears, I thought last night, one of the ladies, I can't, Dr. Emery, it might have been you, but you mentioned ESSER 3, the monies. Now, I'd heard the CARES Act and ESSER 2. When you said ESSER 3 last night, I was lost. And it was just something, I don't know how long it's even been talked about, but we might hear stuff like that and somebody else is talking on the board that, yes, I know about it, and somebody else don't know. And it could just be something that one of us has read or not read, not necessarily that it just hadn't got out. We just don't know it. So that can always be going on. But now with what you said about ESSER 3, it was very good. But that's just a case of sometimes we don't all know everything, and that's some federal money that might be coming. But going back again to the question, folks, I will tell you, if you hadn't had to call or come see Dr. Williamson, he's very open to sitting down and talking with you about your concerns and listening and whatever, but he's very open about doing that and gives up his time willingly to do that.
I just think that, Dr. Williams, I think you're doing an excellent job, first of all, but the other thing is, sometimes when we get left out of the loop, and I know it's not intentional by you or a board member, but, I like those maybe once a week, at the end of the week, a recapitulation. Well, this is top 5 things or top 10 things, and make it consistent with everybody gets it. That to me, works well with me. And it could be anything, and then everybody has it, and then we just know that it's all been shared and move on.
Is there a process like that now that is in place to do that weekly recap?
What I try to do is a daily update of information, but I can do that recap. But I try to keep everybody in real time of what's going on within the district. I think that's important. and then follow up on any questions and feedback. I've learned through the years that that daily update, again, whether it comes directly from me or I have Patty to send something out, really helps us rather than get to the end of the week. So I would want to continue that practice, that I do it daily when it's major issues. Board does an outstanding job overall. There's been a major shift in the public relation part of that he sends out to really help keep everybody informed, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think the daily thing is great. It's something, just like last week, Dr. Williamson, one of the water lines busted in Red Springs. And, of course, it threw school off and they had to cancel. And that was a daily thing. And we need to know that because it's like you said, if you don't send that out and then I get on the street and I live in Red Springs, somebody said, well, I didn't have school today. And I didn't know the water line had busted. You know, I knew it personally because I didn't have no water myself. But I mean, little things like that. I think the daily thing, if it's a hot issue, like you said, and then a recapitulation of what's going on during the week.
What I love about your recap too is it gives the superintendent to this equitable information issue an opportunity to sort of mentally tally. So if Bonte and Mike both call Dr. Williamson during the week and say, you know, I have a concern about blah, 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 and it makes it to the top 5 or whatever, that's another way of all of you know, and not that he's going to say, these 2 people called me, but that there's enough folks who brought an issue that it would rise to the top of what those top issues might be. And I do want to commend the daily. You know, I say this everywhere I go, and I'm working with a lot of new superintendents, and you all knows even from some past things that we worked on. In the time of social media, your superintendent doing something daily is hugely important. You made the point, and anybody can get out there and put any kind of anything out, and people believe it just because they see it in writing, whether it's true or not. Having that daily update is commendable, especially in a district this size. So I'm really glad to hear that's already part of the practice.
So a question that I would have, so that's Dr. Williamson's behavior, right? So Dr. Williamson is committing to a daily update to board members. What is your responsibility as a board member related to that information?
I think we need to share the good things have been said, but also the positive things. And one thing that I do want to share, and that's been brought to my attention, and also happened to me the last 3 weeks, is the phone system here. And maybe Dr. Williamson, and this is not specifically this, but it's a good time to bring it up. I don't know if there's a rotation for answering the telephones, not necessarily the main switchboard. I do not know if they're staggered lunches. I hope they are. But the ease for the public to get to the person they need to, that has been posed to me, and this was posed by 2 teachers, that it's almost impossible to get a human voice. And that should not be. I understand that will happen sometime. And it's happened to me as a board member. And I would call back to Ms. Harry and I would say, will you please walk and get me a human being? That's my terminology, human being. So I don't know that we might need to tighten up. I don't know how we do it, Dr. Williams, on the reception of answering the phone and giving a human being to people. I'm not saying immediately, but eventually get the human voice.
You're talking about in respectable offices or?
And all, in here generally. Now the operator, if you hit 8, I will say 99% of the time you'll get a voice. But when she sends it to the line, like the extension.
All right, that's a big issue, Dr. Manuel.
Yes, it is.
I've been here a long time. It's been an issue for years. That's true. It's not something new for Dr. Williamson, but.
No.
But it's an issue that needs to be resolved.
Yeah.
Because it's a big problem.
So it's a customer service issue.
Yes, it is.
We're in the business, we're in the fact, we're in the children. If somebody calls, they need to be heard, and then they need to follow back up with them and make sure that they were heard, or they got to the person they need to get to. And, And that makes it easier for the rest of us. If we take care of it on the front end instead of waiting for it to get to the back end, so it's
You know, like,
been a problem for years.
like they said, this is not something that's just started.
No,
Sometimes
it's not your,
better and sometimes it gets worse. But I think if there's one way it can, something could be done is when you do get that individual in desk X, you get that recording and you leave a message, but there's never no return call.
right.
That's one of the issues. And I don't know how much it would be behind, but if each day almost, you go in there and you clear out those messages as far as, you know, put a number down. I got to call this person this evening. I got to call them first thing in the morning, because that's where we get the information, or I do. Well, I've called the board.
Yeah.
Nobody answers my phone. Nobody answered my phone call. So, and again, that's not just now, and sometimes it kind of runs in cycles. It'll be real good for a while, and then, you know, it'll drop off. And I know we were doing staggered lunches and stuff, so there would always be somebody available at different places. I know stuff like that has been done, so.
We literally at the department, because we had such a bad reputation about, you know, DPI is this big place that calls go to get lost for forever. We literally have a written commitment that within 48 hours, we will respond. We don't have to have an answer. We're really clear about that. So within 48 hours, we respond and say, this is not in my division, but I have given it to Mike and he should be calling you back. Or I have to do some research to get you an answer. The department says I have 10 days to do that. So I should be calling you back within 10 days. So this is another way that you can be inside your parameters in terms of working with your superintendent on what does that look like? You don't want to get there, but sometimes if something's been going on for a really long time, having a very, you know, clear, this is what we're about here. Because we can't always figure out an answer in 2 days, 2 business days, but we can get back to you and say, I'm working on it. So you know we're there, we got your message. I want to push back a little bit where Jess was going. And that's why you have us here, because we get to go away. It's like grandparents. Many of you in your communication with us yesterday raised this issue of not necessarily superintendent board communication, but board to board. And so I do want to be forthright in what we saw and heard, which is how do we improve as a board the feeling that we're sharing with everyone and that there's not certain information that stays within small groups of board members that isn't with everyone. And I don't know if anybody wants to chime in or, you know, we're happy to do the vehicle on that. I guess we're looking for, are there some practices that might be actions of the board that could help that?
One thing that
I
I've
always
noticed,
contact,
Go ahead, Ms.
I always contact board members when I have to. And if I don't get them when I call them, I text them. And they normally get back to me in a reasonable time. And that's even with sister superintendents, to piggyback on what we discussed a moment ago. If an individual is having an issue with the phone system and they contact me, if I can't get nobody, I text the assistant superintendent or whomever's on that list that they give us. And I always take their person's name and telephone number so that they can call them back if necessary.
Great.
that's what I was gonna say. You took the words out of my mouth, Miss Brenda. That's, and we're all utilizing that, the text, the group text. And, almost on a daily basis. And I think that's healthy.
Do you have a group set up for the board?
Yeah.
I have one set up for each board member,
Chairperson.
but I have one set up.
So you can text everybody at one, good?
I was
And we
would-
can text the superintendent.
I was warned that that could be a gray area of having a group meeting. So
It can, but I was speaking of contacting Melissa, for an example, Miss Floyd, for an example, the individual department heads. Because we have a list that they give a telephone numbers they give it to us, or their cell numbers.
Mr. Grady, what's the gray area there? A text group of just,
I don't think sharing information gets you there to a meeting. But now, if you start deliberating on an issue,
there you go.
that's when you cross the line. Just sharing information, there's nothing wrong with that. You do that all day
Right.
long. But when you
Right.
start deliberating on a specific issue, going back and forth on, deliberations on an issue, I think that's more than a gray area. I think that's a meeting.
That's right.
Gordon?
Are we referring to like the group chat or group text thread that we have? So usually that, I use that as a vehicle to, if the power's out at Orem, I'll let you all know that, or if there's been a death in the, that's.
And there's nothing wrong with
That's
that.
information.
That's information.
Information.
That's two different ones, right? We got just a board, and then we got one with him on this. It's
So thank you.
different threads, right?
Thank you for that. Let's clarify the thread.
Yeah, there's two different threads. We got one thread with everyone, with all the central office people and stuff. Then we got one with just the board. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have one with the board.
Yeah.
Superintendent.
Yeah.
And, going to get Mr. Grady on that one. And that's used, reminding people of this meeting. And I can also do it with email too. But I found that texting in most cases works better. But again, all that is information, a meeting or a workshop. And it's done usually, it's either the text or sometime we might pick up the phone and call everybody and say, this is a situation as far as it's giving information out. That's what we're doing with it.
I'm not your attorney, but I'm sure he would agree with me that you always need to remember that's a public record.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So as you're doing information, that temptation to say, should this be an agenda item, you got to keep that lens on. You don't want to be transacting decision-making. And if you do, remember, anybody has a right, if they can get them, to request, because it's, especially, I believe you all have district cell phones, correct?
Correct.
So I imagine you signed something when you got them that says you acknowledge that whatever goes on there is a public record.
So I just want to ask a question. Is as a communications person, I would say that a communication mechanism is only as good as the ones that you will use, right? Not everybody, uses or prefers the same modality. So I'm asking the question, is the text group something that this board finds helpful?
Yes.
Is everybody good with that immediate connection to one another?
Yes.
Mr. Rand?
Well, from that point, yes, and a thumbs up or acknowledgement is great, but I'm like Mr. Grady, when they go to talking about something, that's where it gets real great, so.
So maybe the commitments, and then we're talking about communications now, and those procedures that you want to follow. So when we kind of drafting up some commitments that we commit to utilizing a text group for sharing of information, right? Is that a commitment that I'm hearing? Because what we're going back to, and while it's a hypothetical scenario, it's making sure that everyone has access to the same information.
Right.
Because that's the equity piece that you want to have as boards. You're right, Mike, you don't want to be walking down the street and somebody tell you something that has nobody likes that, right? So when I asked you earlier, I was like, Dr. Williamson has said his commitment is to do a daily update. And I asked you, what is your responsibility as a board? What is the ultimate answer I was hoping to get is read it, right? Because again, communication can only, if you're not receiving it, then you could easily fall into the trap of, I'm not getting information. So Dr. Williamson has a responsibility to you to keep you informed. And you've given some great strategies today, the daily updates, and I like the idea of a weekly wrap-up, which I'm going to challenge you to say, delegate that. You got a great, competent PR person here, a communications leader. Add the top 10 that we produce at the agency every week into that link. We produce it. In fact, I've been producing it for 52 weeks this week since COVID. The top 10 things coming out of the Department of Public Instruction. It's a public record. You want to know what's happening? There it is. But we have to assume personal responsibility as board members to read and absorb that information. And that just makes you better, right? That just makes you
A
better.
lot of response around saying, if we receive something, we say, got it, Henry, and just.
There you go. Yeah.
I would, when you said texting, I would say if you had texting or email, and then as far as a commitment from us, that we check those each day. And from the standpoint of checking, I'm not gonna send something regular, but checking each day, if I happen to send something, or Dr. Williamson is gonna come, something from his office more often, but if they're checked at least in the evening or first thing in the morning, then if something's been sent, you're gonna know about it.
I think that
Not
is,
only that, Mr. Craig, Miss Patty will also call, and Dr. Burnett and them. When I don't respond back, I've gotten a phone call, or I look back, and then I also check to see what time my internet process it through. And sometimes I don't get it to 4 or 5 hours later, or maybe later on at night. But when I look at the time it was sent to me, it makes me feel better.
I really like that.
I do too.
You've got a superintendent saying, I'm doing this, and a board saying, we're going to look at it regularly, whatever that routine is for you.
Well, now, do we need to go, and I don't do it all the time, that if we get a text from Dr. Williamson or an email, whoever, or if it's something from me, do we as a board need to come here if we're doing commitments, just saying, okay, got it, or received? Do we need to acknowledge that we have read that, or do we not? Sometimes I don't. I just read it. I can't tell you that I acknowledge it all the time that I received from Dr. Williamson. I just look and go on. Sometime I will put something in there. So I'm just asking that as a question.
I think,
From my standpoint, I look to see if it bounces back to me. If not, I make the assumption that you've seen it in the
There you go.
effective response. I just want to make sure that it didn't bounce back to me.
and I think that's what this commitment's about. If you as a group are saying, we're going to commit, because, you know, for John, it might be based on what he's doing in life, that he looks at them every Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday. He's still looking at them and reading and making a commitment to do that. I might only be able to do it every Friday morning. I mean, but you're making that commitment that you're going to look at this communication carefully. And, you know, preferably it would be daily if you have the time, if you're getting it daily for the very reasons that you've articulated. And I think this is a place where between Jess, myself, and your own communications people, you know, if it's a place you want to track it or keep your own little record, it's a way to hold yourself accountable for doing that. And I think if we do that, we can move on here.
I do.
My last little caveat, since I've labeled myself a grandparent, is, you know, getting at what we may perceive as information we don't get, or hearing those things, is really only solved by us. And I want to say that really clearly. If I am feeling someone knows something, my job is to go to that person and say, I'm feeling left out here, or I didn't get that, or directly to the person. It's the hardest thing we do as humans, because we worry about hurt feelings, but if I have an issue or I'm feeling some kind of way, I need to go to Randy and say, you know, before the meeting, I heard you all in the lobby talking about something I had never heard about. You know, where does that come from? Those are personal interactions. You go to your soup and say, gosh, did I miss something? Because the soup may say, well, this was last Tuesday in the daily, or last Friday in the top 5, and you go, okay, good, I feel better. I really wasn't left out. I just happened to miss that. But
if we go back to what we originally kind of set out as a norm today, which is assume good intentions, right? Assume good intentions. Because that's what it comes down to. Communication is it can be the most damaging, devastating, destructive thing within an organization. If you do not own it, if you do not talk about processes and procedures, and to your point, Mr. Craig, I would say if everybody in this room commits that they're going to take personal responsibility for reading the information, you should not have to respond back, unless that's just your style, right? So, because you're only going to do what you're going to do. That's the thing. And your superintendent's saying, unless he's hearing back from you, he's now hearing you've committed to reading it. You've committed to checking it. So we have a network, we have a loop. We have a feedback loop that is now happening. And as Dr. Emery said, if there is a breakdown in the loop, you've got to address it from your personal perspective. Where's the breakdown? If I'm doing everything that I've committed to, and he's doing everything he's committed to, where's the conflict? And resolve it, right? Because we're trying to assume good intent. I want to wrap this one up, though, with a couple of things that I've heard that might be important for you to consider moving forward in green. I heard that customer service is an important thing for you as a board, and addressing customer service issues. We are in the public service business. We serve our communities, right? So I heard that investigating the phone system might be an action step this is for the staff, but investigating the phone system, trying to figure out what's happening there. And then just outlining some expectations of customer service. Is there a written commitment that staff do? And in Brunswick, we actually did that for customer service. We had a rebirth of customer service. And we talked about that expectation that was established that we would call back within 24 hours. I think 48 personally is too long. We live in a real accessible environment. So me telling you I don't have an answer, but I'll get you one, in my mind, happens in 24 hours. That's just how I personally do business. But as you were thinking about, what are your customer service commitments? What are your expectations for customer service for staffing? And that might be something that this board can get behind moving forward to share. And then the commitments that you've discussed, which we'll put over here for your final consideration, we commit to that text group and an email group that we will do a daily, well, I put daily because I heard Mr. Craig say daily, and at your leisure, just, if you're getting a text or an email, I'm just going to leave this here for you to parcel out. That's not for us to decide, but that responsibility that you are consuming what is being put at the plate for you to review. And the superintendent commitments, again, daily updates, and then some level of a weekly recap. And that weekly recap, if it's a larger, not board business related thing, I'm just going to plug internal communication as a good thing to do. And I know, Gordon, you are looking at all the systems of communication in your system, but I can tell you, if you do not have a robust internal communication system with all staff, they will feel that they are your best ambassadors. I don't know how many employees you have on staff, but if you think about every one of your employees is an ambassador for the public schools of Robeson County. And if you are not capitalizing on informing them of the important things that they should know, because they're going to be on that street in Red Springs too. And they're going to get the question about, well, what in the world happened at the high school? Why'd they shut it down? And I promise you, if they don't have an answer, what is likely to be an answer is, I don't know, they don't tell me anything. So think about how you are looping in your internal communications. And I'm just going to share an anecdote. When we started doing this in Brunswick County, I was committed, and I had the support of my board and my superintendent, that any information that went out to the community in the form of a press release or information or any communication was going to be sent at the same time to every staff member in my system. And when we started that process, I can't tell you the number of phone calls and email, panicking. Oh, Lord, Jessica, you sent me something, and I just don't think it was intended for me. And I just don't want to be in trouble. I don't want to be in trouble. Please take me off whatever list you got me on. And I thought, no, I need you on that list. I need you to know that this incident or this thing occurred in our system today, because I want you to be articulate and have the facts whenever you're asked about it. So we had to create a different culture of the fact that they were ambassadors. That was part of their job, was to speak truth about what was happening in our system, not to create a narrative. We're going to give them the truth, and then we expect them to become our ambassadors. So I just wanted to plant that seed. Communications is my jam. It's just what I'm passionate about, and I know that it can transform a school system. So thank you for that. We'll put these, any last thoughts before we move forward here?
One of the issues, which is still very much on our minds, still a very hot topic, of course, is COVID. And as we all know, the board made the decision to essentially start school back on March the 1st. And the superintendent's doing a great job of informing us of the case rate, which thankfully is reducing. And we're likely to get questions about that from the general public. And that's another thing I'd like to commend you on, is keeping us informed on that particular topic.
All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Gentry, we were planning and I was not being a good active listener. Tell on myself.
Yeah.
Was there something I need?
Oh, I was just talking
Okay.
about the COVID case rate
Oh, yes.
and the superintendent keeping us updated on that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's good. It's being transparent. And the more transparent people are, the less they can make up, right? That's the thing. If you know where the truth is and you're out there saying something different, it's going to be real clear about what that person's agenda may be. Okay?
All right, you all had some blended kinds of scenarios, so our late night was to blend this into one issue. So a little bit about what is closed session and so what we want you to do with this one is think, pair, share strategy. And so we ask you to read it, and then the person next to you, and keep your social distance if you can, but we would want you to, with a partner, think about this issue, share what you might do, and then come up with some, what happens next is the question, and then we'll give you a few minutes to do that and ask you to share back out with the whole group.
Mario would stop us.
This is one place we're not going to call on your attorney first. We're going to let you give us some answers, and then we'll let him give us the ultimate.
He's the sweep.
It's got to be out there though.
And the strategy that Dr. Emery is asking for you to use is an instructional strategy we really should be seeing in our classrooms. It's either called shoulder partnering or think, pair, share, which is partnering up students to talk with one another about what it is that they're learning.
Does establishment,
So the ones who are doing the talking are doing the learning.
so how could we stop them from putting it on the agenda?
That's got to be.
Come on down here, Mike.
Hey, that's got to be open.
If you look at the policy, just read the
It's got to be out in the open.
policy committee. The agenda is
Talk about that, Bob.
Can't go in.
superintendent and the board chair.
Out in the open.
Yeah.
So it says, during tonight's meeting, the board is discussing putting a school bond question on the,
Coming up with all sorts.
okay.
Talk about it and bring it back.
Just have to,
Pressure based on recent economic
Just jump on in.
the pandemic.
I just,
what kind of stuff,
While they do
what kind of stuff we'll have to do.
I'm
Thank you, Rick.
not want to
knowing what you.
It's on recent.
position,
Let us talk.
and one make a motion.
He knew. He passed the test. You're telling me he gets an A+. Oh, that's good.
We feel like we need a second position, we ultimately do. They're talking to the general pub,
I feel,
I think that there can,
talking about a bond, I think
have to be able,
my knowledge,
Got to go to the
may be wrong, but I
thing.
don't think
Yeah.
you got buyers
Right, you got to
session talking about transparency.
be open, listen, but we have,
Keep it, have
that's right.
have
We
a.
talked about it, we ain't ever put it on the table, I've been remembering since hearing about it.
early on.
We do.
That's what doing one.
Yeah, I agree.
What if you
Talking about.
start talking about that, you know,
That's what will be.
And it doesn't have to.
the purpose of this bond is,
It's the need to conduct affairs of the board in an open
And stick with it.
manner.
oh, is this bond gonna do this?
Right.
Number 5, I don't,
or whatever.
Got to also,
I'm all,
have to go into conversation to do a bond.
if you hear any.
I think,
because that's obvious, we're gonna.
and,
So it
or
would be
even if
number
it's even
5.
appropriate to go into closed session for it, is, you know, for.
But I think we should have some,
They did bond.
our community,
But it was an open,
No,
But you have community,
that's number 5 right there.
yeah.
you have community involvement with this one,
Think about that.
that represent their district.
Well,
You know,
New school.
we're what's called, we represent, we
I think it definitely, it should be brought
have to go talk to their community.
session.
And,
Uh,
you have to talk to their community, not
someone who is
tell them,
knowledgeable about bond issues than I am to,
we're gonna close down some schools here now.
And-
Come up with which one we're comfortable closing in this community.
plus, of course,
Happen.
a group plan.
bond issue, you've got to have a specific purpose. That's my understanding. You can't just
But we can't promise them.
fund
They promising that
Right.
all of school.
not gonna happen.
I look at number 3, it says render,
What schools comfortable
render all
this district
based on
and
available facts.
District 5?
And the judgment refused to surrender the judgment
Aye.
to individuals or special interest groups. Well, see, this is the pandemic.
That
It's
person,
enforcing it.
I can't go there and say that.
They're doing-
I'm not from that district.
Yeah.
The person that's from
That
that
might be trying to surrender to a special
district, he go there, he talk.
interest group of those that don't want it, so that could apply, couldn't it?
Yes, the big wigs and stuff. Yeah, I think
But
everybody,
we know
hey, it's gonna happen. What is our plan?
Right.
It's gonna happen.
5 and 3.
It's gonna same
What's the
thing in every
kicker?
district.
Is
Yep.
it because of, kids' numbers? Or is it because, we strategically want
Okay, to other boards. All right, look at number 7.
Kinda
north,
stuff,
south, east, west?
Yep, is it because we tried to patch it up all the old schools?
Actionable policies.
And we still giving too much money?
Hey, you could say some people don't like it,
Yep, all that kind of stuff, you're right.
but that doesn't mean it's gonna stop it.
Right, well, the ultimate,
Let's see if we can put it down, something down. Okay, the purpose of
Yeah.
the bond, then we,
You got to do the purpose.
You
Put
could
the-
say 7 might have something.
yeah.
okay, the other board,
Gonna be purpose on this,
public, yeah.
this bond,
Well, and that, yeah, because
the bond.
The next thing we talked about was making, short-term and
on the
long-term
Goals.
because the public,
Short-term, long-term goals for
Fine.
the bonds.
so,
Yeah,
Community, what was that, community?
bonds of the effect
The public,
of having a bond issue,
community
not taking a
input.
Input or
play in,
informative to the community, so both of them.
I'm gonna put,
you become political,
Yeah.
political. Okay, the board endorses, passing the bond issue. If the board, you might say the board endorses putting it
then we need,
on ballot
yeah.
without saying we endorse
our concern.
passing it. You see what I'm saying?
That's how we make an informative
The
decision.
public decides the board.
And just also look at the data, I mean,
Let's see, you good point. That's evaluate,
here's some of the data.
evaluate,
So you,
it's,
often go you in charge and I'll sit back. But I've been to bond hearings and I've never seen them in closing.
evaluate the,
I mean, even though,
All the data.
looking at the
I
board,
just want
they
to
had a bond, they brought bond issue up.
pass
Now, Mr. Grady might say something.
in the future,
I don't think that's legal.
present in the future data.
All right, so we're looking at,
5,
5 under A
gaining.
and 7 under B. And what,
next would be
it was 11, no, not 11, 3 and 7, look at 3
render all citizens
affiliation,
facts and judgment, okay,
and 7.
common
okay.
5, 3, 7.
solution.
And legislators.
Let's see, and then, communicate with other board members.
Yep.
To me, those are the ones that need
Yeah, I
it.
agree.
Is what I think. That coffee's got me, I drunk 3 cups of dinner, 5:30.
I think that's a lot of good pros, then we'll put some cons.
Well, that's to evaluate
Yeah.
On these over here,
experience, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
number 4, conducting business openly.
All board members in preparation
Rating cost effective and efficient, that's what they were trying to be doing.
Right.
If you get that one. Ethics too, what do you think?
When I say communicate,
Ask us about these.
I need to say what we're communicating.
Yeah.
In the court, number 5, our duties as far as making decisions the boards go.
Well,
It's almost every one of them.
communicate with fellow boards in preparation.
Yeah.
Preparation
And then I'm gonna put in brackets,
Be clear on
community,
See, that's-
what we're being asked. Are we being asked to endorse it or just simply?
will that cover it?
Yeah, that should be good.
Doing to
That way we're not
board is just put it,
telling the other board
discussing it, okay?
to do,
Put in a school bond
is sharing what this community is seeing
ballot.
in retrospect to the decision we.
And I guess the ballot, that's the county ballot. Several board members are feeling.
With some cons, you remember?
Hey, we're gonna give you like a minute to sort of wrap up your thoughts, because we
That's good.
we know we have a wonderful lunch coming. Thank you very much, and
I can say,
try to hit this and one more scenario before
lack of
wrap up.
communication,
Goddamn, this is,
discourse.
I mean, would you come over here just a moment? Explain to me what you're asking, because it's vague.
What we're asking here is that in public session, someone wants to talk about something in closed session that might not necessarily be closed session material. And what would you do how would you handle it as a board?
Oh, so the question is just that.
What happens-
You got to open.
Should say discuss.
And what many of you have told us is it would get shut down quickly. But I guess what we're trying to get at here is why would this, it does happen. You told us it. You told us that one of the issues is we either want to talk about things in closed we're not supposed to, or sometimes the public thinks we're talking about or making decisions in closed when we really aren't. And we set this scenario up because these are the kinds of things that people do innocently that may give the public the impression you're making decisions
That's right.
in closed session. So what we're looking for here is how do you as a board deal with this in such a way that it helps your constituents know we can't talk about this? Or what could you do as a board in this scenario that's not just about you, but those people out there who vote for you?
Well, I don't understand what you're saying. I don't think we went quite that far. But, number one.
You now.
Give us what you got.
Mike, John, and Randy, this is what we discussed and came up with. First, it's not going to closed session. Mr. Grady's not gonna let that happen. So, the other part is it could be talked about in open session on the, as far as the agenda, having it as part of the agenda. And then you're saying what's happening next is that the board would need support from the public and dialogue with the public and inform them of your bond and what you're needing it for and the monies that it's gonna go to. And also the county commissioners, because at that point, it goes pretty much to them and have them advocate to legislators, because that's ultimately who it's going to in the end, whether it can be put on as a bond referendum. Pretty much. So that's what we three came up with, and
Great.
That would-
Other thoughts from your discussions? Let us hear from you.
Bonte and I, we discussed it. We sort of set a travel path, if you'd allow, and I'll discuss half of it and let him do the other half. First of all, we feel like in a board meeting, we can discuss a purpose of the need for a bond and tentatively discuss making short-term and long-term goals of what the purpose of the bond is. And then we feel like we need to do some homework. We need to go out to the community, get input, and lead it off by saying, we're requesting a bond and this is what we've tentatively said is long-term, short-term goals. We need to compile all the concerns, pros and cons. Then we need to do evaluation to justify why we are doing what we're doing, from data and experiences. I think there's multiple ways of looking at it. And then, and it's like Vontae said, we don't want to commit to anything. So we have to be careful how we render this information to the community. Then we reconcile on a common solution. And then, it's important that we come back and communicate with all board members in preparation for, of our meeting, the community input. Because some areas might come up with strong points that our area didn't come up with. And the main thing we can agree on is lack of communication is going to create discourse. And by us opening it up and going through the channels, we create a partnership, which makes a team environment, and the negativity shouldn't exist. But you're not going to win everybody over on any decision you make, but you've got the majority, to me, statistically thinking, majority will not lose.
So you guys are outlining incredible like thought processes as it relates to how you would actually go about engaging your community and thinking about the bond, like a bond referendum, which is always an interesting, huge thing. Bev and I both lived through being bond managers, campaign managers in systems, and it's intense. So you guys are thinking and thinking about those things. Let's talk about the closed session aspect of it. Yes,
Mr. Vontae and Mr. Henry, just to emphasize, all of what you said would be done in open session.
Every bit of it.
Yes.
Everything you said would be.
That's right.
Yes.
Just want to emphasize to those listening, all of that would be done in open session.
100%. That's right.
Even if we had a private meeting, which we're not allowed to do, it would cause discourse. It would be all negativity, backlash.
My point is just making sure the public understands,
Right.
we don't handle this kind of business
Right.
in closed session.
Exactly.
If it's not personnel, it's done in open session.
So some of this is right back to the heart of where we were trying to go, which is the bond issue and some great feedback on processes. But the heart of this is if someone innocently were to ask about having a conversation in closed session, we're assuming good intent here, and check me on this, but there are parts of a bond issue, I think if you're going to purchase property, I think legally you can go into closed session because you don't want to advertise that and the price go up on it, right? There are pieces of a bond that could be done, so someone might mistakenly make this public comment, and the point we're making is that it might send the impression to your community you're doing business behind closed doors that is public business. So we're more talking about here how you could, in that moment, gracefully respond or talk about this in a way that helps your community see, so first it's your attorney's going to stop it. It's his job to stop it. It's not his job to articulate and assure voters that you don't do public business in closed session. So I guess where we are is what kinds of things might you do as a board that don't put that board member in a bad spot or make them look bad, but also re-emphasize just what you said. We aren't going to do these, anything that we would have to do here would be done in public session. That was really some of what we were reading between the lines of your scenarios to us, is a concern that folks in the community might be worried that you're doing business in closed session that you're not supposed to be.
Well, and I think it goes to the bigger topic that some of the work that has to be done in the public eye is not easy work. It is, you talk about controversial topics at all of your meetings. That's what you were elected to do. And you took that on. So whether it's a grading issue, whether it's a book or an instructional assignment concern, those are things that even though they may be uncomfortable, what lives in the public domain and then what is permissible behind the closed door allowability under the law, that is a real clear delineation. And I think that to the point of, if you were in this meeting and you had somebody in the best of intentions, because they, this, I could see very easily this just kind of going down a road because like Bev's saying, it's not intentional, but it's just one of those weird, uncomfortable things. And you're like, Lord, do we have to talk about that here? Let's talk about that there. So somebody makes a motion. Mr. Grady, what would you do at that point? So a motion has been made. Then let's just get ourselves in that minute. We are in a board meeting and a board member makes a motion to go into closed session to discuss a bond. What happens?
I would shut it down pretty quick because it's, that's not a topic that they could discuss, just generally discuss a bond issue in closed session. And this board knows me well. I mean, I shut that stuff down pretty, because, they don't need to have the public thinking that they're going into closed session to do something that they shouldn't.
There you go.
Probably, at least in my opinion, one of the most important things that they can do is for the public to know that they're conducting the public's business in the public domain.
Yes.
When, that's the whole guiding principle of the open meetings law. Everything should be done in open unless there's very specific authority for it to be done in closed session. And over the years, those reasons to go in closed session have been whittled down to just a couple handfuls now. And there's a reason for that. The public expects the business of a public body to be done in the open session.
Mr. Grady, for the purpose of the record, and since we have viewers who are going to watch this maybe back, could you summarize what technically is? I know that it's only a handful, but could you give us a quick overview of what happens in what can be discussed legally in closed session?
Personnel, anything that should be confidential, can be anything between the board and the attorney-client privilege information. Purchasing property is an item that can be discussed in a closed session. And there's some reports that can be given to the board in closed session. But again, I go back long enough that I can remember where there was 20 plus items that could be discussed in closed session. And now I think, if I'm remembering right, maybe 11. So that whole area of laws really changed over the years.
Where's the authorizing document for that list of 11? What is that?
143-318.11.
Perfect. And let me,
I can tell you that without opening my book.
I know you can. So I want to also then say, how do you get to close?
Right.
What does that look like to the public?
So anytime the board goes into closed session, a motion has to be made in open session to go into closed session. And a motion has to be made to come out of a closed session. So, and not only that, but in the motion that's made to go into closed session, you have to identify statutorily the reason that you're actually going into closed session. So every meeting, now I hand Mr. Lawson a motion that authorizes us to go into closed session with the reasons we're going into closed session.
So let me ask this question. after that happens, is there also a narrative where the chair or whoever you might deem would say, we don't make decisions, any vote, we would come back out? I mean, because that's part of this process. People see us go in and they know we go for one of those statutory reasons. And I just ask because sometimes saying it over and over and over again helps others out there. If it's the chair who says, we just want to remind our community, any decisions that get made, we come back. And my second question is, when you come back out, do you go back? So let's say we're in time of COVID. When you come back out of closed, do you go back on camera? Do you adjourn from here so people can visually see, oh, they came back officially from closed session? If there was a decision to be made, it was a public one. Does that happen? Are you doing that?
We come back out and open the meeting back up, and we approve closed session minutes or personnel is approved. If it's a vote that needs to be taken out front, there is a vote taken out front for some things. And then a couple other things, and we do adjourn the meeting back on camera.
Perfect.
And if it wasn't on camera, we would come back out and adjourn it from here.
For your community if they were here. Good.
So, Mr. Randy, you are the designated closed session taker, the deliverer, right? So you're the
motion.
declarer.
So, yeah.
That's the
It's
most.
time the motion had, supposed to have a second. So then once that happens, Mr. Craig says, all those in favor, and we go into closed session. But my main thing is what Mr. Grady said, that it's North Carolina General Statutes. It's law. It's nothing that I've made up or he's made up. This is what it is. So, and it is personnel, attorney-client privilege to give us advice as to what we can and can't do as a board. And sometimes, and I'm just saying, when I first came on the board, he had to tell me more than one time, we can't talk about that back here. You may mention it, but he shuts it down pretty quick. Even Mr. Craig, he's done, because you had to get a feeling of what it is. He says that has to be talked about outside, out front. So, and I would say 90% of everything we do is in front
Right there. Right.
of the public. So it is on the up and up there.
I'd like to say too, as a new board member, Mr. Grady had to reel me back in. And I didn't take it offensively. I took it as a professional because he had to do his job. And also when he does that to us, if he has to do it in front of the public, to me, I still look at it as being professional.
That's right.
And that's to keep us all out of trouble.
That's right.
So I look at it like he's our backbone.
He is. He's the conscience of your board. Right? Keeps you square. So, Randy, just in hearing you talk about how you just so eloquently talked about going into closed session, I'm wondering if that's how you go into closed session. Instead, I know you have to read the statute number. I'm sure there's some rule that we have to follow. But I'm wondering, like what Dr. Emery is saying, you just described our board's fixing to go into closed session. And in closed session, we can only talk about these kinds of things. But at the end of closed session, we're going to come back out and we're going to talk about it. So instead of the public just hearing pursuant to General Statute 457, we're moving into closed session to do this, give your community an education. Educate them. Educate everyone as often, as frequently as we can. And Mr. Grady, you might have language, or you might advise against that. But I'm just thinking about this whole concept of you're doing the public's work. This is what you're tasked to do. So part of doing the public's work is to educate the public about the work that you do. So right now, we're going to pause and we're going to go into closed session pursuant to this law. And in closed session, the only things that we can talk about by law are these things. And at the end of it, we're going to come back out. And if there's any business for the public, any public matters, we're going to do it. And put it into words that people can attach themselves to and start to really buy into the fact that you are doing the public's work.
I would just wrap this with a consideration for you, and we need to move on this morning, and I think it comes in your code of ethics. So I don't know that you need to sign a consensus here, but just a reminder about that confidentiality of that closed session. And there was a time, and I'm not trying to take you back to a place that you're not, but I do think it's important for your real awareness that you have of your community to remember that things were in social media that were going on in closed session of this board before you could adjourn and get in your cars to go home. And so I don't think that's a current issue. We certainly haven't heard it or seen it, which is commendations to you.
Yes.
But one of the ways you assure your public that only those things that are supposed to go on, because they're confidential, is that they stay confidential. Because part of this perception that we're doing things we shouldn't be is when we talk about stuff that we've gone into closed session saying, the only reason we can do this in closed is it's confidential. And then it doesn't stay confidential. So that creates distrust in people in your community. So I'm lecturing now, and I shouldn't be doing that. But I do think it's a commitment. You know, you swore an oath of office, and I believe that's part of your oath as board members is that, you know, what happens there stays there. And there are real reasons that are tied to statute that make that important. I have literally worked with a board that was so fractured, my own board at one time, that we had to sign an agreement that we would keep cell phones in purses or backpacks during closed session for this very reason. Because even though nobody was using it, there was some perception if my cell phone was out here during closed set, was I taping it? Was I sending messages to my friend? And one of the ways we create, oh, look at that! Speak of it. And we're not in closed session, but I just offer that as sometimes we don't even know that our own actions or, you know, something as simple as my cell phone sitting beside me in closed sessions gives someone else a lack of trust in me. And so it's an important issue. I think Brenda wants to chime in. Brenda?
I said that's right because that has existed in the past, and I in particular felt some kind of way, but afterwards I went to that individual and I said to them, I hope you will not send the information out concerning what we're discussing in closed session. And they said no. I said okay, and I was good.
And before we leave, thank you, Ms. Farabee. The question that I would just have you to think about is, do you have norms of behavior even in the open session? We talked about closed session norms and putting your phones away and, you know, those kinds of perceptional things. But are there norms of behavior and decorum that you bring to the board table? And what might those be, if you have them, if you believe that there's a universal truth that exists there?
I think your commitments address that. I mean, you know, really, you've taken a deeper dive there, but Jess, let's move on, because I'm.
Dr. Memory, I want to make, as your key word, throwback. What I was hearing and I'm asking for clarification, is we're in closed session. When we come out to keep the public, other than just saying we approve or disapprove what was discussed in closed session, you're saying we can vaguely give a synopsis that we discussed retirements, resignations, and employment opportunities in our closed session. And that's just.
I would defer to your attorney. As a superintendent, I would say when you come out, when you come out, you're either taking action or you're not.
Okay.
But you don't need to if you have to quantify your closed session, you shouldn't be there.
Okay.
See, I mean, it's confidential. And what gets you into closed session is exactly what you just talked about. So that phrase that Randy's giving, that Grady is advising, tells your community, we're going in to talk about personnel. If you come out and take action, we extended the superintendent's contract by a year. You make a motion, you take an action, your community then knows you were probably talking about doing that in closed session, which is where that belongs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And Grady, please, I'm not an attorney, so.
you don't get into the weeds. When we come out of closed session, if we've discussed personnel, we'll approve the personnel
Yeah,
packet that we discussed.
right.
If it's student transfers, we'll approve the student transfers. I mean, but to get into weeds of it and say, we did so many retirements, so many you don't do that. Because once we approve that personnel packet, that's a public document.
Okay, right there.
You know,
They can look at it.
anybody can get it. So there's no reason to go into that because, the very time that you don't do it, then somebody's gonna start pointing fingers saying, well, you did it before, you're not doing it,
Right.
that kind of thing. So,
Well, and to that point, having been that person that had to deal with that personnel, that public record afterwards, I would just encourage you, put a little note in your ear to think about what is your process for release of that information? Because what we found in my system was we might have approved a principal, for instance, on that list. Well, that principal needed to get a phone call saying, hey, you've been approved, so that then that principal could take appropriate action. So we always kind of said, we're going to release the document will be ready by 9 o'clock the following day. So you create a process for that so that you've got time and your staff, Dr. Williamson and his team have time to notify people appropriately. Because on the flip side of that, if something is not approved, you also need to notify that employee as well.
Some people wait till the next meeting to take action too. So you might have closed session to discuss these items and your action comes on the agenda at the next meeting. And that gives you the window that you were talking about there as well. It's your preference as to how you do it, but you don't always have to come right out unless there's urgency or time sensitivity to the action as well.
And some,
Ours is done that night unless there is one issue or something that's carried over. But basically, we handle ours the night of the meeting.
and something else you mentioned as far as the action of the board in open session, I've seen situations where two board members at the same time just stood up and went to the restroom. And the public was like, it's ironic. This certain topic just came about, two board members get up and go outside. What are they doing?
Yep.
Are they having a private meeting? And I've also had my computer out here when we're discussing something. Well, question may come in my mind, what is the policy on that? And I'm looking up policy, but it's perceived that I'm not paying attention to the discussion at hand.
I just think that is such an important thing for you guys to continue to hash out, because those little nuances, even though perfectly innocent, right? You're looking up a policy. Is there another way that could happen? But the optics always, people watch you, right? This is, and it could be just perceived so badly for something that's just, I've got to go to the restroom. Mr. Craig.
Well, I was going there. I want 2 minutes. We talked about these in closed session. I've been approached about them being in open session. And my concern, open session, if they're here, they're on vibrate, and we getting text messages. And, for me, and I'm just talking Craig, mine's here for time. I really won't respond to a text message during a meeting because I don't know everything that's going on with that text message. We've got an agenda, and for me, I have issues with them. Now, that's just me personally. I might be the only person that, again, optics, these cell phones out, and then we're looking at them, and we're back and forth information with them. For me, it's an issue for Craig. Now, I might be the only person that feels that way. Sometimes I've got something that says, well, we can't hear the mic. That's one thing. But when it's getting into issues we're discussing, I don't think that's the appropriate time to be getting it. But again, and I'd be welcome to hear other people's opinion on that. But I'm just giving you my 2 cents on that.
If we agree as a group to not have any involvement with the phone, I think it's great. But I think coming from the board chair, it should come out public that we're asking all board members to refrain from doing so. That way the general public understands, we as a whole board has made an agreement to do that.
I think if you do respond to it, like Craig was just stating, you're creating a deficit for the rest of the public, because you've got an inside line with that board member, whoever that is that's calling, and he is privy, the board member is privy to that information coming from that specific person. And to me, Mr. Grady, you may correct me, but that technically that might be a violation of the open meetings law.
Well, I don't know if it's a violation of the open meetings law, but I think you hit on a point that what a board member would never want to intentionally do is to, especially if you respond in an open meeting to a text someone sent you, that gives the public the perception that there's people out there that's got an inside track that the rest of the world doesn't have.
Could be an
And that's a terrible optic.
Yes, and can I say this to you? People screenshot that and post it on social media. So to exacerbate what you're talking about, you're in a meeting at 7:05 and someone texts you and you text back. There is always the capacity, if you don't do something they want you to, they're going to screenshot that and they're going to post it on Facebook and say, look, I was chatting with Randy during the school board meeting. It happens a lot. We've even gotten leery of responding to people via text because people are, even in social media, people will screenshot that thing. If they want to use it against you, they're going to put it right out there for the whole world to see. So it's not just what goes on, it's how someone can use it against you. And I don't mean to always be negative Nelly, but it happens.
And in response, I have no issue whatsoever Tuesday night before the meeting starts, making the comment that these will be put up.
Thank you.
Will not be used. That's not an issue for me.
Thank you.
I would love to see you take this list of commitments we're going to clean up and give back to you. All of this is public. I mean, hooray for you. It's courageous, in my opinion, that you're doing all of this, because anybody in your community can see this conversation. I think you ought to come back and put all the commitments that you agreed to out there. I just think it's a sign of a really mature board that you're doing this.
I don't know if we're going to get to Dr. Emanuel and my response to the question.
Please.
They have thought and they need to share.
And listen, I think, speaking entirely for Dr. Emanuel, based upon our conversation, we agree with what Randy and Henry said. But I have a question, and we did touch about the nature of this action. And there's several moving pieces to that. And the first statement during tonight's meeting, the board is discussing putting a school bond question on the upcoming ballot. Well, to me, that's a loaded statement right there, because to me, you get into a fine line of presenting information versus taking a position. If the board presents the information as a matter of information and does not take a stand on it or a political position, that's one thing. But if we're not careful, you can get into a political discussion about the pros and cons of the question that's going to be on the ballot.
That's right.
And to me, that's inappropriate. But we have to be careful about that, because our instincts lead us to that kind of dialogue.
Totally. And that's why I was saying it can, in the best of intentions, you could end up kind of in doing public business. It can be messy, and it can be like, oh, we just stepped in that and we didn't quite mean to step in that direction.
Exactly.
So yeah, we intentionally made this one complex in that regard, because this is loaded, it's totally loaded.
Well, and while I'm on my box here, another issue is the timing. Okay, are you presenting this when where it could be next? I know the legislature has to put it on the ballot, but they've got their own agenda. So, you know, are you presenting this at a time that's going to appear to be railroading something?
Right.
Or are you giving a sufficient interval for the board, for the public to absorb this and decide about this, rather than appearing that, hey, this is our pet thing, we want to get it through and we're going to railroad it, you know?
Totally, you know, there's so much work that has to be done to think about all the unintended consequences of both the things that enter to your agenda, the conversation points, but that's, again, those are all the optics that I think we're talking about right now, is how can we do the best work for the public as possible? How can we do the public's work? And how can we do that in a way that's transparent and that doesn't end up making us fall into the rumble strip zone on things as we move forward. So thank you for sharing that. And back to Mr. Craig's question about I think we were kind of getting to the place of possibly an agreement about cell phones. But I don't want to push that if that's not the will of this group. Vontae.
Well, I think if we're gonna talk about the cell phones and stuff, we're gonna have to have a vote on it or something if everybody wanna do it. I look at cell phones as a new way of like communication and stuff. I write all my stuff down on my phone. I write everything, my notes and stuff, it be on my phone, like easy accessible, easy sometimes, you know, the public will have a question, I just say somebody, and they answer stuff. I've seen a lot of people here look at their phone, ask the question. So I don't have an issue with it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well, communicating stuff. I didn't see it, but a lot of people, they look the cell phone, ask the question. I put notes on my cell phone. I then did everything. So,
But and you know, and not trying to kick what Vontae's saying, but on the flip side, I have had people to communicate to me, whether it be staff or whatever, and saying they're not truthful.
Oh.
This is not taking place. Or they may bring up a good question that will bring up more in-depth description to define the discussion at hand. You know, it gives me some insight because as a board member, I don't understand everything that the curriculum committee or the personnel committee is doing to make everything happen, and I don't think I should have to. But I do need enough of information to be a part of this conversation to make the right decisions. So I'm looking at it like it can serve, like Vontae said, but it could be distracting too.
But my comment to what you just said, you said you didn't have enough information, you were not knowledgeable enough. How do you know they're giving you the right information? See what I'm saying?
And that's a
Yeah, because you may respond to something open.
That's a good point.
That you got from that persons.
what I
How do
normally-
you know that's right?
What I normally do is I say, I just got a text.
That's good.
And up front, I make myself clear. I just got a text and this is the concern. And it's hashed out and then we move on.
So I would also like to, just right here, a point that I think Grady has tried to help us with, but we're back there, and it's powerful.
Yes.
And it's going to go to the next scenario if we get time. If someone texts you and you bring up their point at the board table, is that public comment? And has someone then just bypassed your process, your outline process as a board? So, you know, the commitment might not be that our cell phones are not right here, because Vontae's going to use his to take notes. The commitment may be that we're not going to create a separate public comment process with our cell phones that doesn't fit. Because if I'm a person who doesn't have access to you, and it may have given everybody your number, but I don't have it, in the middle of a board meeting, and I come to the meeting and I sign up and I go through the process the board has defined to have an exchange, but someone else only has to text someone and then we're articulating that for them, I would have a question about whether that's a violation of the process.
I've always looked at it this way, Bev. if that person that's texting you is in the room here, would you allow them to talk?
Good question.
And you wouldn't.
It's an excellent way to view it.
That's the way I've always looked at, a cell phone and bringing up what somebody's saying to you is if they're right here in the room, if we're in an open meeting, you're just not gonna let anybody in the audience chime in because they're not part of you. There's a place for them now, and that's public comment. But if you allow that, then your whole meeting's disrupted. You're never gonna get any business taken care of.
That's right.
So, that's the way I always look at.
And I do believe that it becomes public information. That's me. I said in that seminar this past week and they talked about. I think that if I correspond back and they correspond or I make.
Oh, there's no question about that.
Yeah, I think.
Question that's public information.
With what Mr. Vontae said, now I'm old fashioned and I'm not writing no note in this thing here. I got this big pad here, okay? So, I can understand if and that's really not an issue with me. If that's the way, and that's, again, we won't do no votes here because that's part of the reason it's workshop. We can look at it next week. But if you're doing that with notes, that's one thing. But again, I'm gonna go back to somebody text me a question. I don't think it's appropriate for me to respond at all. That's giving me some information, but again, what do I know about that information? I don't ever think about that information being given. So my concern with these is getting that text from somebody who says, well, ask this question and stuff like that. For me, that's not appropriate. And again, I'm speaking personally from me as far as these phones. Now, if you like Mr. Vontae and you're writing it down there or putting it on the computer, see, mine is here because I'm going to go back and refer to this later on. But my problem with the phone, again, is if a communication is going back on and it's taken away from what I think we're actually sitting here doing in the meeting when it's like that.
And I think that Mr. Grady has lifted up an authorizing document that would prohibit that behavior, in the sense of you are circumventing a policy on public address. You have a policy as a board that on how the community can come in and interject and insert. I think you have an authorizing document that should be used to guide this decision about the interchange of information with the constituent via text in a course of a meeting. Am I understanding that correctly?
Public comment period, yeah.
I think it should be incorporated into that comment that some board members may take notes with their devices. So that's what the interaction you're seeing.
There you go. I just think that that's setting a good tone for your meeting, Mr. Chairman. So whenever you are opening up the meeting, and I've had to do this, I know this is, when we go to conferences and things like that, I want the speaker to think that I'm listening, but I'm like you. I use my phone and I use my iPad, and I could be sitting there playing solitaire, I could, but I'm not. But I always have felt compelled to say, I use this device to take notes. This is my learning style. And so I think it's perfectly appropriate to open the meetings and say, we commit to be fully invested in the public work today. And some of us are going to take notes on paper and some of us are going to take notes on our phone. But the commitment that I'm hearing and the going back to the authorizing document is that if there is a device out, it is used only for the purposes of our personal notes. It is not we are not using our devices to correspond outside of the board table.
Could it be interpreted as altering the agenda? If they're texting and then, as a board member, you bring up the question or comment that person has made, we cannot, alter the agenda unless the chair brings up, it as a possible motion for discussion. We as a board can't do that. So could it possibly be interpreted as an outside, I won't mean outside person, but it is outside in that they're texting, and we bring up that information or that question, we've just altered the agenda.
So another potential authorizing document, which is the establishment of the board's agenda. And how do you amend the agenda could also be another perfect reason why this is not permissible behavior.
And at the end of every agenda is a section for public comment. And I guess, Mr. Grady, you might want to add, chime in here. Public comment is taken as a matter of information. It's not necessarily expected to be acted on at the time that the public comment is made. So my question is, would we be violating policy to, maybe not right then, but in the minutes, have the public, under the public comment, part of the minutes, reflect these comments or questions that have come through text? With the understanding that we didn't act on it, we took it as a matter of information, now here it is in the minutes. Would that be an appropriate way to handle that?
Well, I mean, public comment, and I've always advised boards, public comment is just that. It's the public's period to comment. It's not called comment and answer. I mean, it's just comment.
And it's not comment.
That's my point.
Right.
Right, so you couldn't voice, it would be, in my opinion, it would be inappropriate to voice someone else's if they're not physically.
Right. I mean, they need to be, the way I look at the public comment period, when it's truly open pre-pandemic, they've got a right to show up and say their 3 minutes piece.
That's right.
Pandemic, they've got a right to show up with the link that Gordon gives them and say their piece, and it be part of the record. Otherwise, I don't think it's part of public comment. I think with the scenario you present, Mr. Gentry, I think you're just creating a whole new avenue for somebody to be part of the public comment period that shouldn't be there. I mean, they should, if they want to comment, go to that link, comment all they want to, say their piece. That's the reason it's there. Or if it's a truly open meeting where the public's invited to come, get on the public comment, say your 3 minutes piece. That's the reason it's there.
But not incorporated as part of the minutes?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
It's a good question, though. Thank you for
I
raising
like the question. I also want to remind us that we made a commitment early on that if it's a concern, it's going to the superintendent. So if you get a text, part of your being responsive to that person is, I've passed this on to the superintendent. If you get questions about a topic, those also land with staff too, right? So your response back to that person later is, hey, got your question, I passed it on to so-and-so, or, we'll work on getting answers for people. That way you're not ignoring the text, you're not giving that person back some kind of response, you're just landing it in the right.
Giving them an expectation.
Landing it in the right place so that the staff can manage it.
Well, and you mentioned something earlier. You said, I may not have known enough about the topic. If you don't know enough about a topic, what is your role as a board member at the board table to rectify that? What power do you have in that moment if you don't know something?
I've asked for clarification.
There you go.
That way the community hears the
Yes.
same thing I hear.
Like, I don't understand this. Help me understand this. Or can we come back can I schedule some time to come meet with you, Director X, to learn more about this? Or there's a.
We have done that.
There you go.
We've had the superintendent will make a decision to bring the expert in.
There you go. You have that authority, and you should exercise that authority because you want to make decisions based on all available information, right? And clarity of understanding of those topics. So doing that only reinforces the work that you are doing in a transparent way. Man, that's good conversation.
Chair, do you want us bring a wrap, or do you want us, we have one more that really deals with public comment that you all gave us.
Put it up and let me check where they are at.
Okay.
Sounds good. So I don't know that I think we reached a commitment based on our authorizing document that we cannot circumvent public record, a public comment by refraining from any bi-directional communication during the course of the board meeting with an outside of the board table. Am I understanding that correctly? I'm gonna write it up here because I want Gordon to have it, but I just wanted to make sure we had captured that. Okay?
Yeah.
Is that, okay, all right.
I'm gonna
10,
let you
number 9.
introduce the next
Oh,
one.
number 9, all right, as Mr. Craig's going out, look, a retired employee of the district whose grandchild attends Cloverfield Elementary School routinely attends board meetings to speak to public address. Despite efforts to address the concerns by district administration and board committees, this grandparent remains upset and often berates board members and occasionally employees by name. Are there board policies or procedures that can help manage this ongoing situation? So you can think about it, and because of our time, this is gonna just be a popcorn, you think, out?
Yep.
And I'm gonna write this, and I'm gonna,
Okay, you want me to manage the popcorn?
please.
Dr. Emery, it takes about 10 minutes, that'd be.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Are there authorizing documents? So how you structure public comment on the front end does that, but this is more about the repetition and.
First Amendment.
I think policy, you're not supposed to mention names on any comments. Am I correct?
No.
No.
And this, I often say, what would help the public comment period is if the legislature had the same public comment that we could all go up there and comment about their business. They may look at it a little different. But I mean, when you really look at the public comment period, we've got some rules of the road as far as, time and that kind of thing. But I mean, I really think it's one of those, First Amendment issues where people's got a right to say what they're gonna say. As long as they don't get belligerent and threatening and that kind of thing, I just don't think there's a whole lot that you can do about what folks are gonna say. They get uncomfortable, every once in a while, but I mean, it's public comment, and in my opinion, it's pretty wide open. The legislature hasn't not put parameters around it.
Mr. Grady, if somebody in the course of, so how does it look in your system when somebody is speaking publicly? And if I'm speaking and I say, man, that Craig Lowry, man, he's just, he's done X, Y, and Z. What would happen in that moment in a public comment? Who would manage it?
Normally, the board chairman.
And is there a difference between an elected official and what they could say about an elected official who's put themselves out there publicly versus an employee? So if I came in and started using the name of
Gordon.
teacher or Gordon, and I'm making specific allegations about Gordon, can we stop that? Can we control it? Is there a difference between, say, a board member who's elected and someone who's hired?
The way that the public comment period's set up, I really don't know that there's a real distinction there. The thing that's always concerned me with the public comment period is the legislature didn't give us a whole lot of guidance on the public comment period.
Right.
And our practice has been in the past to ask individuals during the public comment period to refrain from calling names and that kind of thing. And I think that that's the right thing to do, but I don't know that we've got any leverage to cause people not to do that. if they choose to do it. And, you know, I think over the years, the practice has worked. I mean, folks, I think refrain from, you know, calling names and that kind of thing, and just talk about generally an incident. But if they do call names, I'm not sure that there's a whole bunch that we can do.
I have a question about your process. How soon before the meeting? Is there a limit, like they have to sign up the day before by a certain time or? Oh, it was right here. Thank you. Wow, go Cole. So I'm just okay. So if I am somebody who comes to your meeting, I can sign up to the point that the meeting occurs. All right?
And you have 3 minutes.
And you have 3 minutes. Is there a clock visible for people to see the 3 minutes?
Basically, what's been done in the past, I think Mr. Grady served as timekeeper, and like 30 seconds before he notifies the chairman, and the chairman will say, you have 30 seconds.
All right.
And then you just ask to stop if you go past that time.
Do you respond to the public comments?
No, ma'am.
Ever?
General rule.
As a general rule or ever?
Well, our 4 years here, there's been a few times where somebody might have said something because of what was said, but now as far as answering that public comment and solving what they're asking, no.
Okay. All right.
If you think about it though, when you, being in COVID-19 stuff, and the way we're doing it, if they're here, they only get 3 minutes, but if they're at the house, they could write a whole page. It might be 10 minutes. You know what I'm saying? If you start reading it and say, put a clock on it.
Right.
So really, they got their liberties are more freely with the COVID-19.
Got it.
Right.
So let me just quickly, because we just share a few
Strategies.
old lady, been around the block, make you maybe feel a little more comfortable. I have never been in a district where there wasn't this person or persons. They have different names. Their parents, their grandparents, they're retired employees.
They are employees.
And this is their outlet. And I completely concur. Part of it is, again, what's our decorum? How do we professionally respond? And especially in a scenario where you have personally interacted with that person, you've investigated the issue, you've tried to hear them out, you've tried to understand their hurt or pain and given an opportunity, try to see if there's some way you can meet them on that, but sometimes you just can't. And it becomes their mission in life.
Yes.
I had a lady tell me one time, she went to college back in the day when women could not wear pants. They had to wear a dress. And she became all about dress codes. And even when there wasn't an issue with the dress code, she came to the board meeting, and every single board meeting, she talked about something, right? Baggy pants, whatever it was, she was going to talk about it. And once she did and sat down, she could be your best friend. But publicly, that was not her persona. So, you know, I guess I'm trying to give you some comfort that these are not problems you're going to sometimes ever solve. So point one. Point two, if that's not the case, you know, figuring out if you want your staff to try to be the ambassadors to these. So I bring you a legitimate issue in public comment. What do we do with that? So it's our responsiveness, not necessarily that we always have an answer or that we can fix. So, you know, is Gordon tracking these things and farming out to HR or to what does the superintendent want to happen with those and the board want to happen with those? So the reputation is, if I do bring a problem here, someone at least responds to me. Not in this forum, right? Because you don't want to do that dance. But are there some strategies you could employ as a district that would help with that?
I would even say that there are proactive strategies depending on when if you look at when do you cut off the sign up for public comment, and different districts do this in different ways. In my former district, we did it the day prior, and then I was tasked with trying to do outreach. My role was community engagement, and if I looked at the list and I saw that there was something that, we were not aware of, I would call that parent or that community member who signed up, and I'd say, hey, I've seen you're looking at you're coming tomorrow night. Is there anything that I can help you with? Is there anything that I can research or do? And I'm not going to joke, probably 80% of those never came to public comment because we could solve the problem. People who are coming to public comment need to be heard. They're coming there because they have something on their heart that is important to them. To come to your place of business and to state their issue. Our job as customer service agents should be to try to help people as best we can get there. So that's a procedural change that, that is not in place in your system to be able to do the proactive part, but at a minimum, taking the follow-up opportunity to let people know we heard you. It just creates such a great relationship in that regard.
One that's not so positive that has been, and I did this in multiple districts when you went from regular public meeting to being on television. So a lot of times you're not even the audience. The audience is, I can be on TV. And when you go from that, you generally see some folks who really just want a broader audience. And so changing your public comment so that you have two, and I know that may sound tough, but what we did was the public comment section at the beginning of the meeting had to be about something on the agenda. The board wants to hear if you have opinions about things we're taking action on tonight, and that's first. And so you sign up and you speak on a policy or decision the board may make. If you want to speak on anything else, that's at the end, and we cut the cameras off. So the last public comment was not on television. It was, you can say whatever you want because we don't know what that is. And we don't know whether it might violate some of these things we're talking about. That's not going to be broadcast. And I know multiple districts have done that so that the board is genuinely getting feedback on things they may be acting on. And those people who want to come talk to you about that, who are very sincere, are at the front end of the meeting and don't have to wait until your meeting's over to do that. And those who want to say whatever, right, those are at the end of the meeting. So not again, it's your policy and whatever you might want to do, but just some thoughts that are happening in other districts around the state.
I ain't afraid to say, we got a recurring, every board meeting
Don't go there.
that a person felt that his child,
Henry, don't go there.
okay.
I think that when we talk about those, the people who, again, come out, want to be heard, and the public address opportunity gives individuals that chance, right? It gives them that space. But maybe thinking about some of the strategies that you're using to engage the public, maybe, again, to try to work with those families who are if they come and they present. Remember, the purpose behind that person who is coming is because they need to be heard. And while and I think, I can't remember, maybe it said Dr. Emanuel or Mr. Gentry had said, sometimes it's uncomfortable. Or maybe Mr. Grady even said it. Sometimes the things that they're telling us are things that are uncomfortable. They may or may not be true, right? But that's that person's truth who is standing in front for that 3 minutes, regardless of whether or not we have been to the moon and back to try to help resolve those problems. And that is their authority under your board policy as it stands, okay?
So folks, we're gonna wrap. I think I'm gonna ask Jess, because she's been working with Gordon on organizing what you've done here, to give you a recap of what you can expect as a result of this. I want to thank you I just think this has been incredible conversation. It's been a good learning opportunity for me being here with you. And I just want to commend you again. I don't think this is typical behavior. I think the maturest of boards are able to come together and do this kind of work. We were ambitious. Obviously, we switched around some of these scenarios. And, as we shared yesterday from the department, we're sort of your people going forward. And so if you want to do more of this, if there are other issues or ways that we can support or help you feel, you have made us feel welcome and partners and a part of your district and your work. And so we're happy to come back whenever that might work for you if you want to continue. But just maybe sort of nailing this into a package for what they may expect going forward.
That's right. Let me give it back to you, the way we started this morning, right? So I just, again, I want to echo what Dr. Emery said. You guys have done a lot of hard work today. This is not easy stuff. And you have to continuously peel back the layers. And sometimes that layer you peel back, it brings up another issue or ask another question. And that is awesome. Because in the dialogue is where you grow as a team and you grow together in that. So what we've captured today have been sort of the big buckets, the things that I think you kind of landed on while you may not have necessarily adopted those commitments. I just wanted to kind of re-hit them for you. You did 3 big buckets. You did a human resources side and how we go about how you operate as a board related to human resources, hiring people from the community, reaching out to you, and how you can be the very best resource to the communities in the way that maintains your role as a board. So we've got some core values, and Gordon has been capturing this in a Google Doc, so he's got the actual document. Some core values related to personnel, which I think are important, and then some commitments. You did the same thing for communication, which was great. So some commitments about how you're going to communicate with one another, how you're going to communicate with the superintendent. And then the superintendent's done some commitments here as well on how he will continue to work with you. And we identified a few needs in the communication realm. And those are the things that are here in green. So, looking at how we engage with expectations on customer service, investigating the phone system. Those are like operational things that the staff would probably want to follow up on. And then the last thing that we kind of landed on was at the board table. And a behavior at the board table that would keep you in support and enforcement of your public comment piece, as well as the commitment that if you do receive communications during that time, that you would go back to one of the commitments earlier, which is to really let work with your superintendent. Your superintendent is the person you should be communicating those concerns that are being listed up. This is tremendous. I didn't actually think we could get even this far today in this work. These are 3 huge buckets. And so I would say that they are the beginning of the work. And Mr. Craig, what I would encourage you and Dr. Williamson to do is maybe think about the document that Gordon has and how we can help support this too. Package this into a summary of your work session today or yesterday and today. And maybe, as Dr. Emery said, as an item at a board meeting to review that. We had a board workshop. And at our workshop as a board, we tackled a lot of tough topics, but we started coming to an understanding of how we're going to operationalize some of these pieces and then share those out. The other piece that I would say is finding a way in this process to come back together once you have officially codified these as your agreements, right? Because we talked about them today, but nobody's really voted. I don't know that you have to vote or reach consensus. Consensus is what we can all live with, right? That's the definition of consensus. It may not have all the parts and pieces that I want, but it's something I can live with. And I think that as a board of all different human beings, we can reach consensus on something, then that at least gets us down the road. And then we allow ourselves to come back together and we check ourselves. Is it working? Is it not working? And when you're doing that, you're asking, is this communication network working? So allow yourself to ask those questions, but give yourself time to practice the commitments that you have. So that would be my summary to you today, along with any opportunities that you have for questions to kind of wrap us up. And Dr. Williamson, anything from the superintendent seat that you would like to share as we're kind of closing out today?
Outstanding work session, good conversation. not forced conversation. That's critical, because we're trying to build relationship and trust as a team, and it's just been open up conversation, not forced conversation.
Okay, I'd just like to thank you ladies for being here. And before I forget it, Mr. Cole back at the back for all his technology expertise that he helps us with, and Dr. Burnett for being here too. And he's going to follow up with an article in the newspaper based on what we have done here. And again, Dr. Williamson, we're glad you're here today too. Miss Patty is not in here, folks, but she ran off the materials and stuff and helped these ladies out there and did a lot of coordination of the cater and just various things in the program. So you'll see her around here, so make sure you thank her also. And again, I'd like to thank you folks for being here and the input, and we're gonna do this again. It might be a retreat in the fall where we add some staff people here, like assistant superintendents and what have you. These ladies come back and do a couple hours. I don't know if we'll do anything before the year's out, but we do appreciate what you've came in and what you've done today. And we thank Mr. Grady being here for answering all those questions. And if he hasn't stopped during closed session yet, it's going to happen somewhere along the way. Miss Jessica, Dr. Emery, a little token of our appreciation.
Oh, isn't that pretty?
Very sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've really enjoyed our time here with you.
Yes.
This has been really great engagement, and we just really, like what Dr. Emery said, we just feel like a part of an arm of your team, and we just appreciate that. Thank you.
Randy, I think lunch is ready. If you'll bless the food, we're going around next door.
Can I grab a picture of all y'all before,
Okay, after he does this, we'll.
That's fine. Let's pray. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, thank you once again for letting us come together. Thank you for your mercy, grace, and love, dear God. Dear Heavenly Father, as we've been in this workshop and learned, dear Heavenly Father, let us carry it forward to our meetings and our closed sessions and for the benefit of the public schools of Robeson County. Bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies and our bodies to your service. We ask this in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
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 You talking about Dr. Gordon over here, something? Okay.
Right on time.